My coaching career began as an offensive coordinator, and the only college that would hire me was New Mexico. They were the worst team in college football, but I had one chance, and this was the start of my coaching career. It was also unlike my other Dynasty series because I could change schools every time I got an offer. The first game I'd ever coach was against Drake, and it was going to be rough with a 63 overall offense. Senior quarterback Miles Kendrick would be the guy running all of the plays that I call, and he was my ticket to moving up the coaching ladder and landing a bigger job. On one of the last plays of the first quarter, he rolled out and threw a 25-yard dot to the back of the end zone, connecting with Trey Hall, and then with 2 minutes left in the second quarter, he scrambled in for 6. So we went into the half up 8. My offense was performing really well for my first game coaching, but I can't act like it was perfect, with some play calls obviously needing to be removed from the playbook for the future. In the end, sophomore running back Nathaniel Jones would bust off this massive run as we were just focused on burning the clock and beating Drake in our first game of the year. My coaching debut resulted in a win, but I was expecting to get railed at LSU. Maybe one day the Tigers would offer me a job, but for now, I had to coach as an offensive coordinator. And I'm not gonna lie, it was a struggle. Well, that was until senior wide receiver Jordan Porter made the play of the game, taking this simple pass 59 yards to the house and fighting his way into the end zone. I sure didn't teach him that, but it made me look good as a coach anyway, and if we were going to lose the game, at least we had some positive takeaways. We went into the half down by 17, and it didn't get any better from there with the LSU defense clamping us up. My offensive coaching ability was definitely up for questioning, but it's not like we were supposed to win, and my job was still safer than ever. It was pouring down rain at home against UTEP, so we had to run it, but that wasn't my normal coaching philosophy, so I can't even fault Miles Kendrick for turning the ball over and putting us down 7 points early in the game. However, I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised to see how he responded on the next drive. He was getting more comfortable running the option, and he would end up outrunning everybody on the field for this 83-yard touchdown. I had turned the senior quarterback into a scrambler, and his running ability was giving us a slight edge. Unfortunately, the rain was still making it very difficult to move the ball, but early into the second quarter, we stayed consistent with the passing attempts, and it paid off big time with a Jordan Porter touchdown. My offense was on another level today. However, it wasn't perfect. We had an opportunity to bomb the UTEP defense at the end of the half, but Austin Erickson dropped it. And by the third quarter, we were struggling to move the ball. So all of a sudden, it was a one-possession game. And then after that, UTEP scored, and I needed to get my offense going. So I decided to start calling option run plays like we did in the first half. And just like that, we had moved the ball all the way down the field, and we were threatening to take the lead. With 16 seconds left, Miles Kendrick took in the game winner, and he had performed at a level I had never seen. I was praying on every coach's downfall for better opportunities, but our offensive stats weren't exactly impressive. So if I wanted a better coaching job at the end of the year, we needed to keep playing well, and Nathaniel Jones gave us the exact start we needed against UNLV. He would take this halfback screen 32 yards to the house in style. And then to end the quarter, Austin Erickson actually held onto the ball. Whenever I decided to call run plays, we seemed to succeed. Junior and backup running back Sherrod White would simply outrun everybody, going for a 62-yard run to put us up 21. But then, to end the first half, Miles Kendrick fumbled the ball away, a UNLV cornerback picked it up, and he would take it all the way back to the end zone. Miles Kendrick was definitely blowing the game for us today. This terrible read would end up resulting in the Rebels tying it up, and I couldn't believe we blew our 21-point lead. Fortunately, with our defense clutching up multiple times, we would escape with a win, and my next coaching gig was at Wyoming. They had a beautiful stadium, and it honestly felt like we were playing in a high school football game. I can understand why there weren't many fans in the crowd because nobody got on the board until there were 2 minutes left in the first half. I can't stress enough how much we were overperforming as a team, going out and dominating against Wyoming. We were projected to be one of the worst teams in the country, but somehow we were rolling, and I truly believed we could win the conference. It felt like we had a huge lead on every other team already, and our next opponent was 1-6. I had coached this offense to a great start to the season, but Miles Kendrick started off roughly against Utah State, and that meant I was back to only calling for him to run the ball, which ended up working out. I had turned Miles Kendrick into a running quarterback, and I was hoping this transformation of his game would land me a better coaching job at the end of the year. He couldn't stop scoring for us, and as an offense, I had coached them well throughout practice to the point where they were actually running the option the right way. Unfortunately, our defense didn't play well against the Aggies today, so we had to shove the ball down their throat attempting to score. And with less than 3 minutes left in the game, the option continued to work, giving us a 4-point lead. However, our defense gave up another touchdown, so we had to throw it, which ended up exploding exposing why we had been running the ball so much with Miles Kendrick. With Utah State taking their 3, our quarterback had one more chance to prove himself, but again, he turned the ball over in an ugly fashion, and with that being his 15th interception in 6 games, I had a tough decision to make. We couldn't continue to only run the ball, so if Miles Kendrick had a bad game today, I was going to make my first big decision as a coach, and that would be benching him and bringing in somebody that could throw it. I told him that straight to his face, so I think it helped motivate him to come out and actually deliver some decent throws, helping us move the ball and getting onto the board first against Western Kentucky. After we took that lead, I decided to start calling some more option plays, and that paid off big time with this 38-yard Luke Wyson touchdown run. So we went into the half up 11. However, by the 4th quarter, we found ourselves down by 3, and then after this run that went almost nowhere, Miles Kendrick wasn't getting up. So we had to resort to the backup quarterback, which was not going to be easy. He wasn't ready to come into the game, and it definitely showed. Luckily, our defense locked up, and with 90 seconds left, Miles Kendrick was back. And even with the clock being our biggest threat, I decided to call some run plays to make sure we got in field goal range, but Miles Kendrick threw the game-winning dot to Luke Wyson instead, so we were now 5-2. And I had to somehow coach my team to a win against San Diego State. I was calling as many option runs as I could because that was what my offensive unit did the best. And whenever we tried to pass it, most of the time it didn't work. Miles Kendrick's inaccurate throws were making it almost impossible to score, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to call play-wise on offense. I knew what we could do that worked, and even though most of the time the option run would help us move the ball down the field with ease, it took us forever to get close to the end zone and score. After that touchdown, our defense never got us the ball back, so we lost our 3rd game of the year. And all of a sudden, we weren't the top team in our division. We had to win this game against Air Force to stay in the conference championship race, and Nathaniel Jones put us off to the best start possible. He took this halfback screen from midfield and would turn it into a 57-yard touchdown play by outrunning everybody out there. However, the story of the season was watching Miles Kendrick struggle to throw the ball, and it was honestly remarkable how I made this offense look competent for most of the year. I really regret calling this wide receiver screen play because not only did it result in an interception, but Air Force would take it back for 6, so that was the last time I'd let Miles Kendrick throw the ball today, as I only called run plays from there. Just like you'd expect, that didn't go very well with us never scoring, and I was ready to make a quarterback switch. I benched the senior for a sophomore, and it was time to see how that went. I decided to start a new quarterback for this game with sophomore CJ Montez making his first career start for New Mexico, and he was hooking up with our receivers early. Not only was he a much better passer, but he was starting to get down the option offense that worked so well for us all year. And I was really glad that I made my first big coaching decision because CJ Montez looked good and he had multiple years left in college. We ended up going up by 4, and that lead lasted to the 4th quarter. Colorado State wasn't able to stop my offense, and the quarterback switch worked. CJ Montez was the new starter, and we were now bowl eligible. I was coaching against a ranked team, and if my offense played well, I might land a better job at the end of the year. The story of my coaching career so far was the option run, and it continued to prove itself as my best play call, with Jordan Porter making multiple players miss and taking in this impressive 43-yard play. With 25 seconds left in the first half, Austin Erickson caught the go-ahead touchdown, but with 3 minutes left in the game, we were trying to make a 10-point comeback. And after our defense got a clutch stop, we had a minute to score. But in the end, CJ Montez didn't seem to have the clutch gene in him, and we had one more game left. We were playing on a blue field at Boise State, and CJ Montez started off the game with one of the most inaccurate throws I had ever seen, completely missing the receiver. However, he bounced back in the second quarter, throwing a touchdown dot, but his success didn't last as he fumbled it away on the goal line later in the game, and threw another interception in our bad loss to Boise State. I wasn't sure I'd get any job offers because my offense had a bad couple of weeks. There were going to be a lot of new coaching opportunities, but before I found out if I got any offers, I had to coach in our bowl game. And CJ Montez threw an interception to start it off, which was becoming a normal occurrence. This pick wasn't his fault, but I was beyond furious because that was a great play call by me that should have resulted in a big game. By the end of the first half, we finally scored, but we were already too far behind. My first year coaching didn't end how I would have liked, but I was ready to see if I had any job offers. I was offered a contract extension by New Mexico, but that wasn't my only option. North Texas offered me an offensive coordinator job, but I ended up staying at New Mexico for the time being. So this season, I was trying to finish with an even better record eager because I wanted to get a job coaching an offense at a big school or as a head coach. By the end of the season, I'd find out if I could do that, but for now, I had to focus on my current team because we were projected to have a rough year, and we opened up the season at North Texas. They offered me an offensive coordinator job months ago, but I decided to stick with junior quarterback CJ Montez at New Mexico, and I was hoping by the end of the day, I'd be happy with that choice. I redesigned my offense in the offseason so it would fit the type of players that I was working with, and so far, it was going pretty well, with Jace Taylor making an incredible end zone grab. It was a tie game at the half, but after CJ Montez got hurt in the third quarter, I had to put in backup quarterback Isaiah Chavez, who ended up playing really well, dropping bombs to Austin Erickson like it was nothing. In the fourth quarter, it was a tie game, so I started calling more run plays for junior Nathaniel Jones, and I was confident that he could get us the win. With the clock running out, he put us in the field position we needed to kick the game winner, and I coached just well enough on offense for the backup quarterback to get us the win. I had to coach against North Dakota State the next week, and even though they were an FCS school, I was a little nervous. The Bison were the best in their class, but after this filthy spin move from Nathaniel Jones, he would take the run all the way down the field before getting stopped just short of reaching the end zone. Fortunately, I called a great play just seconds later, and my offense was off to a good start. I ended up realizing that I had no reason to be nervous, because by the end of the first half, we had scored 31 points, and I was so proud of my offensive play calling throughout the game. I expected the success to continue at Old Dominion, and CJ Montez made sure he didn't disappoint me. I still needed to coach some better pass protection at practice, but until then, CJ Montez would escape the pressure and run it in himself. We took the lead with 15 seconds left in the half, and we would never look back from there, opening the third quarter with a 43-yard dot from CJ Montez to Austin Erickson, and continuing that dominance throughout the rest of the game. CJ Montez was playing amazing in my system, putting up 48 points on the Monarchs, and I was eyeing a lot of potential head coach openings. The following week, I had to coach at Washington in the rain, and we couldn't move the ball in the downpour. Obviously, I was expecting my offense to struggle in the rain, but I wasn't expecting us to struggle to get on the board. CJ Montez wasn't on target today either, missing wide open receivers for no reason, and by the fourth quarter, we hadn't scored. So I started calling only run plays, and even though we ended up losing, I was happy that I finally got us into the end zone a couple of times, especially because my offense was ranked as the best in the conference. I opened up conference play coaching against San Diego State at home, and this halfback toss on third down was a bad play call by me, so we tied the game at 3 instead. CJ Montez was struggling to make the right read throughout the game, but I kept making him throw the ball until he got over the mental hump, and we went into the half up 3. By the fourth quarter, we maintained that lead, but once again, we were without our star quarterback. So I had to call almost all run plays, and Nathaniel Jones did everything I asked him to, sealing the game for us, which put us at 4-1 on the year. I understood my offense scoring 6 points is bad, but in the end, a win's a win. I got to coach at Allegiant Stadium, and it was massive. I think it made my quarterback nervous because he threw this goal line interception, but just like last week, I kept calling passing plays to make CJ Montez comfortable, and that's when he delivered this 47-yard bomb to senior Bobby Wooden. Later on, he'd find his tight end in the end zone, and then Nathaniel Jones would get wide open, so he hit him in stride to put us up 14 on the Rebels. All was well with my offense playing better than ever, but then after backup running back Sherrod White got so close to getting into the end zone, I saw CJ Montez was holding his knee. For the third time this year, he was out for the game, but at least we already had a good lead, so even though UNLV ended up coming pretty close to catching back up to us, we would come out with a win, and we would stay on top of our conference. I called the perfect play to start our game against Colorado State, and midway through the first quarter, I watched junior wide receiver Luke Wyson completely cook a defender and take it 36 yards to the house. Because I turned around this offense, I was excited to see what job offers I had at the end of the year, but first, we had to finish business against the Rams, and I almost pulled Austin Erickson from the game when he dropped this wide open catch, which would have been a touchdown. He's lucky that we weren't in a close battle today, because if we were, I would have made him regret that drop. CJ Montez had another incredible performance, and we had our first snow battle of the season. I was freezing on the sideline because I wasn't expecting a snowstorm in November, but that didn't stop me from calling the best passing plays in the conference. By studying film, I figured out that nobody on Boise State marked the running back out of the backfield, so I made sure we abused it until they figured out how to stop it. I would consider myself an offensive genius if I had to give myself a title, but at the end of the day, I could just be an average offensive coordinator. I was fortunate to have a quarterback with an arm like CJ Montez as he continued to put the ball exactly where it should be, and he was single-handedly going to land me a much better job at the end of the year. This throw to Austin Erickson was beautiful, and even if he didn't finish out the play, we were thriving, and Luke Wyson would make this catch seconds later. I continued to make my offense rail Boise State, and we gave it to them super well. 49 points in the snow was unheard of, with my offense cementing itself as practically unstoppable. At this point, a head coach job might be possible, but I still needed to get through the year, and I was happy with how we started this game. The Air Force defense wasn't able to stop my offensive plays, and even though CJ Montez would get hurt on this one, I coached the backup well enough to take over just as well. Or so I thought. Chavez turned it over a lot, and when it was a one-possession game, he threw the game away by not holding on to the ball. So we had about a minute to get down the field and get in our kicker's range, and without Sherrod White coming in, stepping up big time, and making plays as he did here, where he took it 28 yards to put us in the right position, I'm not sure we would have won this game. But after improving to 8-1, I was coaching in the game of the season. Both teams were undefeated in conference play, and the winner would make the conference championship, but CJ Montez started off the game terribly, so to make sure he redeemed himself, I called a play where he needed to hit the slot receiver over the top, and after he did that, he got his confidence back as he got us into the end zone. But on the next possession, he lost the ball right on the goal line, so obviously I chewed him out, and you'd think he'd hold on to the ball after that, but he fumbled again, and I didn't know what to do. My star quarterback was broken, so I made him block while we ran Wildcat for the whole possession, which got us a 3-point lead at the half. I decided to let him redeem himself in the third quarter, and he ended up setting a school record. Maybe I was a little harsh on him sometimes, but it clearly made an impact on how he played, and then at the end of the game, after our tight end dropped a tutty, CJ Montez got his normal out for the day injury. This was becoming a normal occurrence, but fortunately it was already over with us having the ball and a 10-point lead. The conference was all ours, and all we had to do was keep winning. I wasn't going to let us lose at home to Fresno State, as I called one of the best plays at the beginning of the game. They were 2-8 this season, so I had to make sure my offense looked amazing if I wanted any good coaching offers in a few weeks. If any schools were looking at me, they'd realize that CJ Montez and I were a package deal, and I wanted to take him with me wherever I went, because even when he threw interceptions, sometimes we scored out of it. By the fourth quarter, Fresno State had crawled back into the game, and with about a minute left, we had to get into field goal range, which would not be the easiest thing to do in the rain. I didn't want us to attempt to throw anything deep with how slippery the ball was, so I called plays that moved us down the field in a completely different way, and it managed to work out in the end. This was our 10th win of the year, and I was so proud of this team. I ended up coaching this offense into the top 25, all for us to start against Wyoming like this. So I was relieved to see CJ Montez got us into the end zone on the following drive. However, he was still struggling throughout the game with fumbles like this one. Obviously, he was unlike any quarterback I'd ever coached before, so I gave him a lot more leeway than I normally would with someone, but I think that's what made us so successful. Unfortunately, he started the fourth quarter with this interception, and Wyoming was making us work incredibly hard to finish conference play undefeated. With 2.5 minutes left in the game, sophomore wide receiver Jamar Sanders would take this simple pass all the way around the Wyoming defense and into the end zone. But it was called back just seconds later, which actually helped us because we ran down the clock and kicked the game winner. We finished the regular season 11-1, and I was coaching in the Mountain West Conference Championship game against San Diego State. We honestly didn't start it off in the best of ways, with the Aztecs having a 4-point lead, and by the end of the first half, we hadn't gotten into the end zone. However, in the third quarter, CJ Montez didn't go with the play I called, and I couldn't even get mad at him because it worked. So I kind of just let him take over and do whatever he wanted to for the rest of the game. And surprisingly, it went well, with the junior quarterback placing the ball perfectly wherever he wanted to on the field. So with 3.5 minutes left, we finally took a lead on San Diego State as CJ Montez hooked up with Jamar Sanders. And a couple minutes later, I called a play where we went with an aggressive deep shot to Austin Erickson to end any hope the Aztecs had. That was what it took to win the Mountain West Championship, and I had coached this offense to the top. Our bowl game was against the Utes, so before I got to see what coaching jobs I could potentially take, I had to watch my offense get railed by Utah. I was pretty upset we got matched up against a 99 overall team in our bowl game, but I couldn't let that take away from the amazing season we had just put on, so that's why this is the last highlight from this game. We obviously weren't the better team, but I was glad I could finally choose a new school, and even though New Mexico begged me to come back, I wanted to see who wanted me, and that's when I saw my golden opportunity. Alabama offered me an offensive coordinator job, and I signed it within seconds. I was really going to be coaching alongside the GOAT. Obviously, it should be much easier to succeed, and I was on the path to getting a head coaching job at the end of the season. I was only going to stay here for a year, and I was ready to take on the new SEC. My first coaching gig was against Wisconsin, and I was going to be in charge of making sure Jalen Milroe could run my offense. It shouldn't be too difficult considering how talented this entire team is, and I instantly loved coaching for the Crimson Tide. Not only did I have the best receiving core in the entire nation, but I had great running backs as well. In the end, I got my first win at Alabama, and I was excited to see how the year went. The next week, I got to travel back to my home, Kentucky, and I was thrilled to finally coach in front of my family. Jalen Milroe started the game out by using his legs, juking by Kentucky defenders with ease, and stumbling for extra yards. I told him he needed to run today because of the downpour, and it was going to be a tough battle. Due to the rain, I went back to my option run routes, and the plays I was calling were not only getting us a lot of yards, but thrashing the Kentucky defense. Sophomore running back Jamarian Miller had a huge burst of acceleration on this touchdown run, and after Jalen Milroe couldn't get this throw out in time, I was glad I had the refs on my side as an Alabama coach. Truthfully, the cannon that my quarterback had this season made CJ Montez look like a bum, so I was fortunate to be in the position I was in, because if we're being honest, this would get me a head coaching job. And if I had learned anything so far throughout my first 2 games at Alabama, it was that as I got bigger job offers throughout the series, my life would get so much easier. Everybody on the Crimson Tide was so good, and because of that, I was 2-0, which meant I was already eyeing head coach openings for the end of the year. However, none of that is guaranteed, so I needed to focus up because my offense was off to a bad start at Kyle Field. And after this terrible read, which turned into an interception, I screamed at Jalen Milroe while he walked off the field. I think it really got to him because with a minute left in the first quarter, he connected with JoJo Earle for a massive 80-yard touchdown play to get us within 7, and JoJo Earle was having an amazing game fighting for every last yard that he could get. I really do believe that my outburst changed how Jalen Milroe played because he performed extremely well the rest of the game. Even though we started off poorly against Texas A&M, by the end of it, we were on pace to beat the Aggies, but then Jalen Milroe could have just slid and ended the game, but instead, he took a hit and lost the ball. So all of a sudden, my offense was in an overtime shootout on the road, and I was calling all of the right plays. But unfortunately, the Crimson Tide's defense was absolutely pitiful until they got this huge stop on the 2-point conversion. So now all we needed to do was get a touchdown on Texas A&M and make this game-winning 2-point conversion. I was extremely pumped about this result, and I was now the coordinator of a potential Heisman winner. But I was super upset when Jalen Milroe started our game against South Carolina with a terrible underthrow, so I screamed at him like last week, and because of that, he responded by delivering this 52-yard touchdown bomb to wide receiver JoJo Earle. I'm not saying yelling at your players always works, but for Jalen Milroe, it seemed to get him back on track. But unfortunately, as a coach, my job was about to get 10 times harder. Jalen Milroe pulled his groin on that play, so I was now stuck coaching a new quarterback, and seriously, who on earth is Mike Tyler? With his shocking 59 speed, I was forced to stop calling option runs, and I was not excited to deal with coaching a freshman quarterback for the next 4 weeks. All of a sudden, my entire offensive game plan was going to run through Jamarian Miller, but that got boring fast, so I decided to force Mike Tyler to sling it with us up by 21, and surprisingly, his deep ball perfectly hit Kobe Prentice in stride for an 80-yard touchdown. Now that we had a comfortable lead, I let my quarterback try and pick up some extra yards with an option run. But obviously, he wasn't the ideal starter, and the following few weeks could be rough. Our next opponent was North Dakota State, and I called one of the weirdest plays in college football history to start the game, but it only got a couple of yards. No matter how creative I got, it seemed like I'd have to rely on the freshman quarterback to sling it, because whenever I gave the Wildcat formation formation a shot, it failed. And even though Mike Tyler struggled to complete passes throughout the game, my running play calls were good enough to get us an easy win over the Bison, and we improved to 5-0. This game against an SEC team would be our freshman quarterback's first real test, and since it was against Vanderbilt, I wasn't too concerned about it. I decided to call a play where Mike Tyler could throw a deep ball, and despite my doubts, for the second time in the past few weeks, he delivered a perfect bomb for a touchdown. And so I let him do it again. Midway through the second quarter, Mike Tyler was showing that he could make any pass on the field, hitting sophomore wide receiver Kendrick Law on a 73-yard play. I had no clue where this guy came from, but all of a sudden, he was proving he could potentially stay the starter, and I thought I was going to struggle to coach the offense with a freshman QB, but instead, Mike Tyler was going to make it extremely difficult to choose a quarterback for the rest of the year. Jalen Milroe was still out for 2 weeks, so he was going to get his chance, and this rain game would be a great opportunity for him. I had a tough decision to make at starting QB, so when backup quarterback Mike Tyler started off against Georgia with a pass to Kobe Prentice that would turn into a 63-yard touchdown, I was very impressed. He was already building amazing chemistry with the rest of the offense, so you know I was excited after this 39-yard dot to Kendrick Law. He was only a freshman, so there was still room for improvement, but I felt like he had the potential to be great. However, I can't sit here and act like he was perfect with missed throws that should have been touchdowns and horrendous reads that led to Bulldog interceptions. With how the second half went, I felt like the first half could have been a fluke, and with 39 seconds left, we found ourselves in a tie game, so I was very happy to see that JoJo Earl got us almost all the way to midfield. Then Mike Tyler stepped up and put us in a position to win by finding Kendrick Law with this 31-yard laser, and after our kicker nailed the game winner, I was relieved that we stayed undefeated. But there was definitely a quarterback controversy. We were tied with our rivals for the division, so this game was very important, and I was ready to see how backup quarterback Mike Tyler played. I told him how crucial it was for him to go out and dominate so he could steal Jalen Milroe's spot when he came back, but he was extremely inconsistent sometimes. After he threw a dot, he turned around and threw an interception straight to the defense, which wasn't just a turnover, but a game changer as Arkansas took it all the way back to the house. So I could tell Nick Saban wasn't impressed, and he needed to be for Mike Tyler to remain QB1. I can't lie, I love coaching the freshmen, but I can't defend this play. Arkansas would take the interception back for their second pick six of the day, which put us in a bad situation. I was going to need to start calling some different plays because I felt like the Razorbacks had figured out how to stop my offense and my quarterback. This third interception almost went all the way back for another pick six, but he was fortunately stopped short. However, Arkansas scored anyway, so it was 27-0, and I felt like Mike Tyler had completely blown his chance. We finally got on the board with this kick, but in the end, it just wouldn't matter at all. Maybe I could take Mike Tyler with me to my new team, but I knew Nick Saban wouldn't want him starting again. So I was surprised that Mike Tyler was starting against Tennessee, but it was only because Jalen Milroe was still out. Therefore, I still had to coach the backup quarterback, and after last week, he was looking to bounce back, which was good news for us. He ended up putting us up by 7 in the second quarter, and I learned that leaning on our running game was a good option. I was excited to end the first half up by 21 points, and I had figured out how to coach the offense with less pressure on the quarterback. By the end of the game, it was clear that we were going to win, and I was so proud of Mike Tyler that I gave him a hug, but he wouldn't see the field again. So I was upset with Nick Saban because with Jalen Milroe back from injury, he decided to make him the starting quarterback. But at the end of the day, all I could do was call the offensive plays, and I was just trying to avoid an upset loss to Appalachian State at home. Fortunately, we were not Michigan or Texas A&M, and even though it ended up being a close battle, in the end, we would beat Appalachian State by 8. But Jalen Milroe had a terrible first game back, and he needed to perform well with the playoffs on the line. I was coaching at the Swamp for the first time ever, and without our starting running back in this top 5 matchup, I was forced to call a lot of passing plays. We were down 14 at the end of the first quarter, but that wouldn't last for long as I let Jalen Milroe attempt a deep throw on 3rd and 9, which led to a 55-yard touchdown by sophomore Kendrick Law, and he continued to find the open wide receiver. On the last play of the second quarter, I'm just going to let you watch what could have been one of the greatest plays ever. Jalen Milroe somehow escaped the collapsing pocket and found Kobe Prentice down the field but unfortunately he didn't get any blocks, so we wouldn't take the lead until the third quarter. I kept trying to get the running game going, but since it didn't work, I had to call passing plays instead, which led to a beautiful dot from Jalen Milroe. With a minute left, I watched our defense stop the Gators on 4th and 14, and from there we would pick up this huge third down and end the game. I was so proud of Jalen Milroe as he played so much better this week, and maybe Saban was right about him being the starter, but I still felt bad for Mike Tyler. If I could coach this offense to a win against our rivals, we would clinch a spot in the SEC championship, but we were certainly not off to a good start against Auburn. They were locking up our receivers and Jalen Milroe was struggling, so I ripped him a new one on the sideline, which ended up working like always. He was able to throw a touchdown pass just a couple of minutes later, and midway through the second quarter, he would place a pass perfectly over the Auburn defense to JoJo Earle for a 56-yard touchdown which tied the game. But by the third quarter, we were back down 10 and struggling, so I was relieved we scored a couple of minutes later. To start the fourth, we ended up going up by 10 points, and when Auburn responded right back with a touchdown of their own, I knew this would be a crazy finish. With 2 minutes left, Jalen Milroe threaded the needle on an amazing play call by me, but Auburn scored again, so we only had 39 seconds left to get a field goal, and with time winding down, it looked like we had just gotten into kicking range. I watched as the Alabama kicker tied it up, and now it was time for overtime where we got into the end zone first. After our defense held Auburn to a field goal in the second overtime, we were set. All we had to do was get a touchdown, and we did that. I was pumped that we escaped with a win, and it was behind Jalen Milroe's 7 touchdowns. I felt like I could land any of these jobs now, but first, I had to coach in the SEC championship, and after this great play call by me, we were off to a good start. Then Jamarian Miller rushed for 13 yards to score the first touchdown, but you might have noticed that Mike Taylor was back in the game, and that's because Jalen Milroe suffered a concussion, which was going to be a problem. Mike Taylor hadn't played a snap in almost a month, so I realized that I was going to need to switch up my play calling if we wanted any chance to win. This kick tied it up at 10, and by the fourth quarter we were still stuck in a tie. Every time I tried to let Mike Tyler sling it, he couldn't get anything going, and the fact that we were still in this game was incredible. I love the guy, so I put all my faith in him with 2 minutes left, and then he finally came alive and did something right. He found running back Jamarian Miller, who would take it 58 yards while juking and breaking tackles to get us into the end zone. After that, I wish I could say it went to overtime, but Ole Miss scored, leaving us with about 30 seconds left, and on our last chance to tie it up, Mike Tyler dropped back and threw the Hail Mary just a bit too far. So we lost the SEC championship, and I was ready to get a head coaching job. But before I could choose a new team, I had to coach in the Peach Bowl, and we were off to a good start against Florida State. We continued to put up points, but we were down by 6 going into the fourth, so I knew that I needed to call some of my best plays yet, and I started coaching on a whole other level. With 30 seconds left, we were setting up to settle for 3 and kick the game winner on the Seminoles, which is exactly what ended up happening, and after finishing my season at 12-2, I was ready to find my first head coaching job. I came to Alabama to get other offers, so I rejected their contract extension, and Marshall, Tulsa, Ohio, Louisville, Western Michigan, and Ball State all offered me head coaching positions, and I have a lot of options to choose from. But first, we have to recap how I got here. I started as an offensive coordinator at New Mexico, and even though we went 6-7 in my first season, that was nothing compared to the following year, where I coached the offense to a 12-2 record while winning a Mountain West Conference championship. Because of that, Nick Saban wanted to bring me over to Alabama as his offensive coordinator, and I took that job immediately. We ended up finishing 12-2 in my first year, and even though we didn't make the playoffs or win the SEC, I had job offers flooding in from loads of schools. I ended up narrowing it down to Tulsa, Louisville, and Ohio, and even though it pains me to say this as a Kentucky fan, I had to take the best opportunity, and that was the Louisville Cardinals. Additionally, quarterback Mike Tyler came over to the Ville with me, but we weren't supposed to be good at all. My first game as a head coach was against Drake, and Mike Tyler started it off with a laser. Even though the rain was making it hard for my receivers to catch it, I continued to call passing plays because I trusted my offense to get into the end zone. I understand Drake isn't the toughest of opponents, but for the first time, I was in charge of the defense as well, so I needed to get used to that. I think the most frustrating part about coaching at Louisville was witnessing all of the drops, but I had to realize that I'm no longer coaching Alabama receivers. In the end, we would easily win, and I started my head coaching career 1-0. I was coaching against my old team the following week, and they were actually favored to win. However, that didn't stop the sophomore from hooking up with the other sophomore. Mike Tyler connected with running back Curtis Bruner for a 78-yard touchdown on the first play of the game, and then on the next drive, he found his tight end in the end zone for another 6. I was pumped up about how well we were giving it to them until this Mike Tyler interception, and New Mexico would go on to tie it up at 14, so I was relieved that this play call worked to perfection just minutes later. With about 20 seconds left in the half, Mike Tyler delivered a dot to Mike Smith, and by the end of the third quarter, it was clear to me that my team was better, so I was glad that I came to the Ville where I was trying to build up my legacy. The next week, I was coaching against Kentucky, and there was one issue. I grew up as a Wildcat fan, hating the Cardinals, so it was weird coaching against my favorite team, especially because Kentucky was Louisville's biggest rival, and I'm not saying I'd leave the Cardinals, but if the Wildcats wanted me, I'd pull a Chris Beard. For now though, I was stuck coaching on the wrong side of the ball, and it wasn't pretty. Fortunately, we finally got into the end zone in the second quarter, but my defense was getting fully creamed, and I couldn't believe that at one point we were down by 31. I had to make sure that I kept my job as a head coach, and this performance was not going to impress my boss. By the fourth quarter, we finally got another touchdown, but we still got pounded by Kentucky, and my athletic director was not happy. I had to coach this team to a bowl game this year if I wanted to safely keep my job, but that wouldn't be easy because Mike Tyler was getting destroyed, and my defense was leakier than someone on Miralax. However, there was a bright spot on the team, and that was freshman John Swain. He was our returner and the backup running back who outran everybody on the field and took this kickoff 102 yards to the house. He might have tied it up, but that alone wouldn't win us the game, and I was getting sick of watching my best receiver drop the ball. I felt like besides the return, nothing was going our way, and I had no idea how I was going to keep my job. I think Mike Tyler was starting to regret following me here as well, because after back-to-back sacks, he completely lost it, and I was forced to put in Ronnie Mitchell due to Mike's excessive screaming. My team's chemistry was worse than ever, and we let Pitt get their first win of the season. So I knew that if we didn't beat Virginia today, I would be on the hot seat. And Mike Tyler decided he wanted to start the game the worst way possible. I'm not sure what happened to him, but this was not the same quarterback that I coached at Alabama, and I was fortunate that my defense was able to make some clutch plays. However, that level of play didn't translate to my offense, so after Mike Tyler underthrew his receiver on this play, I looked him in the eyes and I threatened him. I made it very clear that if he didn't win this game, he was benched, and to my surprise, his offensive line didn't seem to care to help him. By midway through the third quarter, it was a 3-possession game, but that changed as Mike Tyler finally got us on the board less than 2 minutes later, and all of a sudden, Virginia only had a 6-point lead on us. So after my defense got a very clutch stop on third down, Mike Tyler had one last chance to win it and keep his starting job. He started off the drive by finding sophomore receiver TJ Keith for a 57-yard play, and then he went right back to him on the game-winning touchdown throw. Somehow, I coached us to a win after being down by 20, and that alone could get me another year in Louisville. And this is what the ACC looked like so far. I had to coach in a tough home game against Dabo Swinney, and it wasn't going to be easy to outsmart him. I called a play that should have been a touchdown, but Mike Tyler dropped the ball for no reason, which led to a Clemson defender scooping it up and taking it all the way back to the house. At the start of the second quarter, Cade Klubnik extended the Tigers' lead to 21, and after number 64 completely missed his blocking assignment on this play, I realized that my team never stood a chance in keeping up with number 18 Clemson. I was in for a long rebuild here at Louisville, and I just had to make sure that I didn't get fired. My goal for the season was to get us to a bowl game, but I didn't know if it was possible because we'd have to steal 3 of our last 6 games. I knew I had to coach us to a win against Boston College, and we started off badly. I couldn't believe we turned it over, and then, within just 3 plays, the Eagles were in the end zone. So we were in for a rude awakening. Luckily, TJ Keith was determined to help us tie it up, slipping off of guys and picking up a 27-yard play. But that wouldn't be enough to keep us in it, as Mike Tyler was really struggling in the rain. So I decided to lean more on the running game, and it was slowly getting us back into it against the Eagles. We started the second half by getting a huge stop on 4th and 9, but my offense just wasn't getting it done this Saturday night as we still trailed Boston College by 11. So we needed a perfect fourth quarter, and honestly, it wasn't looking very good for us. However, Mike Tyler threw a dot with 2.5 minutes left, and he had a chance to tie it up on the last play, but he couldn't get the throw off, so we fell under 500 on the year. Luckily, I had another chance to get my team a win this week, and beforehand, my athletic director told me to come up with new plays for the game. So I let my halfback throw a first down pass out of the Wildcat formation, and my offense seemed to move the ball better when he threw it. I hated having to settle for 3, so I was glad when we got 7 on our next possession. However, with 90 seconds left in the first half, we found ourselves going down 11 to Florida State, and it continued to get worse and worse. I don't understand how I got stuck coaching such a bad team, but I wish I took an easier job. At this rate, I'm pretty sure Julian Newman would destroy my offensive line, and this game was becoming a disaster. We ended up losing by 24, and that was our 5th loss in the past 6 games. However, I had a chance to get my biggest win ever against undefeated Syracuse. They came to the Ville as the number 4 team in the country, and it looked like they were going to leave as that as well. Our offense was still lackluster, and our defense certainly wasn't good, so I had to watch from the sidelines as my players couldn't execute my plays. We had a terrible first quarter, and I had to bench quarterback Mike Tyler after this interception. Even though he transferred here because of me, I was way too mad to keep him in the game after this pick 6, and it was nice to watch backup QB Ronnie Mitchell actually run the ball with speed. He lit a spark in our offense, coming in and getting us on the board for the first time in the game, so all of a sudden we were back within 1 possession, and to start the third quarter, I watched Ronnie Mitchell pull off one of the best throws I'd seen this year, which got us all the way down to the Syracuse 7-yard line. From there, we would actually tie it up against the 4th best team, and I don't know what I did with this change, but this could single-handedly save my job and get us a bowl game, as Ronnie Mitchell continued to dot up the Syracuse defense with ease. This was a completely different team than the one I coached for the past 6 weeks, but with 7 seconds left, Syracuse tied it up. On top of this, overtime against the Orange wasn't going well, as they scored almost immediately into it, so I was shocked to see that Ronnie Mitchell stepped up and tied it back up right after, but I made him go for the win here, and that was the greatest play call of my career as I took down a top 5 team. I was nervous when we played North Carolina, as it felt weird to start a quarterback 24 overalls worse. However, he got a huge win last week, so he deserved the starting role, and I'd love to say that Ronnie Mitchell continued to play well, but it seemed like since North Carolina had film on him, he was easy to stop. Additionally, I still couldn't coach the defense at all, so it's safe to say that Ronnie Mitchell's first start didn't go as planned, as we lost by 31 points. But since it seemed like I was going to keep my job, I decided to give Ronnie Mitchell one more chance to stay our starting quarterback. But he didn't start off in the best of ways, turning the ball over to Wake Forest less than 2 minutes into the game. However, with our bowl eligibility on the line, he seemed to figure it out, and I was proud of my defense for forcing a huge turnover in the red zone. By the end of the first half, we had gone back and forth with the Demon Deacons, and I was praying that we could win so we could stay bowl eligible. Ronnie Mitchell's flaws continued to show throughout the night, but we still had a 2-point lead, and this touchdown in the 4th quarter would seal the game for us. Not only did I get us to 5-6, but I also landed us some great offensive recruits, and if I could coach us to a win today, Louisville would be bowl eligible after this up and down season, but that would be much easier said than done. North Carolina State was giving Ronnie Mitchell all sorts of problems, so we were struggling to score. With a minute and a half left in the 2nd quarter, the Wolfpack took an 11-point lead on us with this touchdown run, and with an offense that couldn't move the ball, I knew that our chances of making a bowl game were gone. This fumble that was returned for a touchdown made me realize that I should have never betrayed Mike Tyler, so let me know in the comments who should start at QB next year, because I don't know what to do. I ended up finishing my first season 5-7, and nothing about my team's stats were impressive, so I would need to change that in year 2 at Louisville. There's a decent chance that I get fired this year. Last season, I took my first head coaching job at Louisville, but we went 5-7, so I couldn't get us to a bowl game. And if I failed to do that again this year, I would be out of my job by the end of the video. My first recruiting class was almost in the top 25, and with plenty of new talent on the team, I was surprised that we were projected to finish at the bottom of the ACC. My athletic director was expecting 7 wins this this season, so I was not happy that our first game was against the best team in the country. But after naming Mike Tyler as the starting QB, it was time to play our opening matchup. And I knew that if we wanted to take down number 1 Arizona, we'd have to play perfectly. So I was thrilled to watch Mike Tyler hook up with Greg Smith to start the game. However, just like last year, my defensive unit was extremely questionable, and I knew that if I wanted to avoid getting fired while getting Louisville to a bowl game, I'd have to figure out how to make them play better. On the other side of the ball though, Mike Tyler looked incredible as he casually dropped this 38-yard pass into the hands of junior Tyler Starks. But I could tell that if we wanted any chance of pulling off this upset, we would have to score every possession, so I snapped my clipboard in half when starting running back Curtis Bruner dropped what would have been the game-tying touchdown. As a junior, he simply can't make mistakes like that because it would lead to another Arizona score, and after the Wildcats started the third quarter by going up 21 points, I knew that we had fallen too far behind to have any chance at pulling off the upset. The only positive was how well Mike Tyler played, and hopefully he could get us to a bowl game. I knew we could beat the team that ripped off our logo, but that certainly wasn't the only exciting thing about this week. At the end of the game, I'm going to show you all the recruiting class that I'm putting together, and it's insane. But first, we have to take care of business against Illinois State, and I was just thankful that it wasn't a close game as Mike Tyler put up 4 touchdowns. But now it's time to see the potential incoming prospects, and I was going for 9 different 5-star recruits, which was going to take a lot of NIL cash and strippers. But players with stats like this are well worth it. And if I was going to avoid getting fired at the end of the year, we would have to beat number 24 Kentucky, which wouldn't be easy with the way our defense started the game. However, Mike Tyler and TJ Keith seemed to have other plans as they single-handedly carried my offense down the field and tied it up just minutes later. It was simply their game today as they continued to connect on plays that I knew nobody else in the country could make, and they linked up in the end zone for the second time. But our lead was short-lived as I still couldn't coach this defense, and Kentucky's quarterback came out on fire to start the third quarter. However, that wouldn't make a difference as I called the best plays that I knew in the second half, and we ended up just running out the clock. I brought the Governor's Cup home to Louisville, which got all of the 5 stars on my recruiting board desperate to come to the Ville, and today I was expecting to coach us to an easy win over the Duke Blue Devils. But it wasn't looking good for us from the start. I wanted to chew out every single defender that was on my defense after this opening touchdown, and they weren't the only ones getting screamed at. The offensive line was content letting Mike Tyler get run through, so he couldn't get up after that, and I was forced to put in backup quarterback Ronnie Mitchell, which would make this game hard to win. However, it did give us the flexibility to focus more on pounding the rock, so it was a tie game up until this Duke touchdown run. Unfortunately, it looked like it was going downhill from there with this blatantly terrible read by Ronnie Mitchell, but it wasn't. Junior quarterback Anthony Brooks turned everything around when he picked off the Blue Devils and took it back to the house for 6. Yet it still just wasn't enough to get us a win. Duke took a 2-possession lead on a field goal, and they ended up giving us our second loss of the year. I was getting close to being on the hot seat, and we couldn't lose to Virginia this week. Luckily, Mike Tyler was back for this game, and after he found senior wide receiver Brian Carter on a simple slant, he got to sit back and watch him go to work on the Cavalier defense, pulling off a 67-yard play which would lead to the tying touchdown. I think I was setting Mike Tyler up for success by calling a lot of passing plays because he was threading the needle with ease. By the third quarter, he already had 4 touchdown passes, and I was so excited to see the Alabama transfer finally living up to his full potential as he got us a much needed win. If I could outcoach Dabo Sweeney, there's no way Louisville could fire me. However, it seemed like Mike Tyler didn't care too much, as he made sure Clemson got on the board first. We ended up falling behind by 14, so I screamed at my quarterback for his poor start, and he bounced back. But Mike Tyler couldn't single-handedly carry this offense to success. My offensive line was still letting him get destroyed from behind, and to end the third quarter, Clemson continued to keep the score distant from us. So out of desperation, I told Mike Tyler to just throw it up, and surprisingly, Tyler Starks came down with it, which I thought could lead to a touchdown, but he decided to turn it over seconds later instead, and we left Death Valley with a bad result. So I had to call for an extra practice to make sure that quarterback Mike Tyler was on top of it because we were hosting undefeated Boston College. That was my best decision yet, as he pulled off the play perfectly in the game, and even though the Eagles were ranked as the 11th best team in the entire country, we started off with a 14-point lead. And I was so proud of how well my defense was playing tonight. However, I probably shouldn't have said anything because I knew I had jinxed us with Boston College tying it up. All of a sudden, I was watching my team collapse in front of their home crowd, and we trailed going into the fourth quarter. I felt like we could still win this game though, and I decided that I needed to get back to running a balanced offense like I did at New Mexico. However, after watching one of the unluckiest interceptions that I had ever seen, I gave up as we simply didn't have what it took to pull off the upset. And I could easily be fired if we didn't win against Florida State this week. So it wasn't good that Seminoles quarterback AJ Duffy started the game off with a 14-yard touchdown run. Things got even worse when Curtis Bruner fumbled the ball away on the goal line, and then Florida State scored again. Even Mike Tyler ended up turning the ball over close to the end zone, but that would lead to a Tom Carter pick six, so it ended up being okay, and we got back into a rhythm at the end of the half. To start the third quarter, my defense forced their second turnover of the game, but that would end up leading to no points for us, so with 3 minutes left, we were not in a good position. However, we ended up getting the ball back with about 70 seconds and a chance, but with time running out, we were going to need a miracle, and Mike Tyler stepped up and connected with Tyler Starks on this play. I decided to be aggressive here and go for the win, which was risky, but it got us back on track to making a bowl game, and I was glad that I did that because almost every 5-star I was recruiting committed, giving us 8 of them in a singular class. However, I was not happy with how Mike Tyler started out against Syracuse, as we went down extremely fast to the number 7 team. With 2 minutes left in the second quarter, we still hadn't scored, and I was getting embarrassed as a coach in this matchup. I couldn't stand watching Mike Tyler get railed with no protection, so I told him to just sling it before he got sacked next time, and that didn't go well either. With 2 minutes left, we were still down by 21, so I realized that making a bowl game wasn't very likely, and since that was what my athletic director wanted, I knew that this would probably be my last snow game ever as a Cardinal. I was on the hot seat, and if we didn't win 2 of our last 3 matchups, there's a good chance I wouldn't be back in Louisville next year. So fortunately, we got on the board first, which was something new to us. And then I watched Mike Tyler throw one of the luckiest but amazing touchdown passes I'd ever seen. He was torching the number 21 team in the country's defense, and with 30 seconds left in the first half, he threw his 4th touchdown of the day. I also have to mention how well our defense was playing throughout the game because I was so proud of how they finally stepped up and did their job. In the end, it was clear that we'd stay on top, and taking down a ranked team should save my job. If I could coach us to one more win, we would gain bowl eligibility, and Mike Tyler started off against Wake Forest by delivering a beautiful throw to wide receiver TJ Keith for a 57-yard play, which also got him into the Louisville record books. Even though the Demon Deacons responded right back, I called the perfect run play, and Curtis Bruner busted off this 48-yard breakaway touchdown run. I decided that I needed to get him more involved in the offense, and that decision made it so my team moved down the field with ease. Once again, my defensive unit was actually doing a good job, but so was Wake Forest, as they read my wide receiver screen call like a book, and with them taking it back to the house, that made it a one-possession game. After that interception, Mike Tyler seemed to struggle a lot more, but after I instilled some confidence in him, he slung it 50 yards in the air to find TJ Keith with a massive play for the second time today. And then on 4th and goal, my defense got a clutch stop, so with less than 2 minutes left in the game, it was clear that I was going to pull off a much needed win, and I actually made us bowl eligible. At this point, we couldn't finish first in the ACC, but if I could take down NC State, I knew I wouldn't be fired this year, and TJ Keith almost started the game off with an insane play. However, he didn't, and we fell behind by 7 7 early. Luckily, that deficit didn't last long as Mike Tyler threw a dot, but our defense couldn't keep the Wolfpack out of the end zone, and we continued to give up touchdowns like Ohio State did to Michigan. With quarterback Mike Tyler being just a tad bit off target today, I knew it was going to be a long one if he couldn't figure it out, and the score just kept getting worse and worse for us. In the end, it was 49-7, and that's when I heard the big transfer rumor. Apparently, Mike Tyler didn't want to play here his senior year, so Tyler Starks might have a new quarterback next season. I got to travel to Hawaii for my first bowl game ever as a head coach, and you might notice that backup Ronnie Mitchell was starting today. But that's because Mike Tyler officially confirmed that he was transferring, so I felt like I had to put a new starter out at QB. And even though there were times when he made some really questionable reads, I love the fact that he had the ability to use his legs, making my offense way more versatile and harder to stop. We went into the fourth quarter up by 9, and Ronnie Mitchell made it even more. He was also able to get the 2, putting us up 3 possessions, and that would be enough to get us a bowl win. I knew that I wouldn't be fired after that, and I even got a 7-year extension. So with the best recruiting class in the country, I was faced with my biggest challenge yet. I lost my star quarterback to Kentucky in the transfer portal, and if the incoming recruits didn't step up this season, this team would have a rough year. Fortunately, I recruited one of the greatest classes ever with 9 total 5-star recruits, and I created a new offensive playbook for this season which was focused on running the ball almost every play. To be successful in doing this, I had to use a quick and elusive quarterback, and I felt like 5-star recruit Bobby Babcock was the perfect fit for my offense. However, not every freshman was off to a good start as Mike Samuel lost the ball on his first rush, which led to the Hoosiers scoring first. It was looking like it would be a long day, but that wouldn't be the case. After back-to-back 17-play drives that ended in touchdowns, it was tied, and then we took the lead right here. Unfortunately, Indiana would go up by 3 points to start the fourth quarter, but I had a plan to make sure we secured the win. I wanted Bobby Babcock to burn as much clock as he could while we moved down the field, and by the time he made a miracle play scrambling in for the go-ahead touchdown, there was no time left, so we started the year 1-0. Mike Tyler chose to transfer to Kentucky after playing for me for 3 years, and he seemed like he was a brand new player. I could have never imagined him pulling off a rushing touchdown like this, and I still don't know how he did it with his 59 speed since I had to change my entire offense for him. Anyway, I was happy that I had Bobby Babcock now because he was the running quarterback I needed for my system, and additionally, he could throw some hot dots. The freshman still made some mistakes, but I was thrilled to see what the future had in store for the former 5-star recruit. I could tell that my new offensive game plan was tiring out the opposing teams, and we went into halftime with a lead. Then, to start the third quarter, another one of my 5-star recruits from this offseason, wide receiver Josh Wilson, pulled off this incredible 103-yard kick return to put us up 11 on the Wildcats. And from there, Bobby Babcock continued to shine, finding senior Tyler Starks for 6. I knew Mike Tyler well, so he couldn't do anything against my defense, and after Curtis Bruner picked up his 4th touchdown of the season, where he took this halfback screen 29 yards to the house untouched, we sealed our Governor Cup victory, and all of a sudden, we weren't terrible anymore. But I was not happy we started off our game against Virginia Tech by giving up a 47-yard play to the Hokies, as they completely embarrassed my defense in the span of just 2 plays. I needed Bobby Babcock to lead us down the field to tie it, and when I said that, I was expecting like 15 consecutive runs to score, but instead, I sat back and watched Wade Roberts, the backup tight end, put on a show. This offense was bringing me so much joy, and I was loving every second of it. However, undefeated Virginia Tech continued to score touchdowns as well, and this one could come down to the wire. My defense just wasn't able to get a stop, so it was a good thing that my offensive play calling was elite. On 3rd and short, I made sure we got it to the outside of a stacked box, and Josh Wilson finished the playoff with his speed. There was something about the freshman that was just special. He had another great return for us, getting us all the way down to the Hokies' 42-yard line, and after Virginia Tech went up by 6, Bobby Babcock had his chance to win us the game. With less than a minute left, he continued to pick up first downs, and Cardinal Stadium erupted after this play. We somehow beat a ranked team, and that put us into the AP poll. For the first time in my career, I was the head coach of a top 25 team, and Bobby Babcock was ready to continue moving us up the polls. He was running the ball like he was a running back, breaking tackles from the Blue Devils left and right, right, and the threat of him scrambling made him almost impossible to stop. Instead of taking our 3, I thought it was a good idea to run a fake field goal, and unfortunately that ended up being a useless play as we wound up settling for 3 anyway. Duke's offense came alive at the end of the second quarter with back-to-back touchdowns, but we stayed in the game with senior running back Curtis Bruner doing his part in carrying the offense down the field. That drive would result in a touchdown that was inches away from being a turnover, and from there we would begin to pull away with the game. Duke tried their hardest to stay in it, but after the rain caused this drop on 4th and 2, we would run out the rest of the clock, and then the worst news in the world hit my desk. Bobby Babcock was out for the season with a broken vertebrae, so I was stuck playing senior Ronnie Mitchell, and he just wasn't as good as the freshman quarterback. He was great for the locker room, but when you fumble the ball away like this and give the Cavaliers a 14-point lead at the beginning of the game, you can't be QB1. Like my first year at Louisville, we started down 3 possessions to Virginia, but unlike that game, a comeback didn't seem possible. And by the time Ronnie Mitchell got into a rhythm, it was just too late. We did not manage the clock well today, and if we wanted any chance in winning the ACC, we'd have to figure it out, so I made a new plan to win games with this team. And since my defense was by far the weakest part of the roster, I decided that we would chew the clock. However, this would only work if my offense could match the touchdowns given up, and after this extremely frustrating start, I realized that maybe my game plan wasn't so genius after all. Fortunately, Ronnie Mitchell somehow ended the half with this miraculous touchdown throw, and I realized that we could stay in this game while burning the clock in the third quarter. It was simple, but it was really effective for moving the ball, and after a 19-play drive, we finally scored. Then our defense got this huge third down stop, and that was all we needed to win against Clemson at home. Limiting possessions was extremely smart, and I felt like we could win the ACC doing this. Even though watching this offense was the equivalent of watching paint dry, it was working better than I ever expected it to. We held the ball throughout the entire first quarter, and then we finally had our first big play of the game with this 25-yard pickup. To end the longest drive in college football history, Ronnie Mitchell ran it in, and after our defense got this huge third down stop, Boston College knew they weren't seeing the ball for the rest of the half. We ended the second quarter going up 2 possessions, but the Eagles stayed in the game, scoring on their second drive of the day, and then Curtis Bruner fumbled the ball away just plays later. This was exactly why I wanted to limit the number of possessions there were in our matchups, and I was hoping this would be the final drive of the entire game. With 2 minutes left, we still had possession of the ball, and Ronnie Mitchell thread the needle to Josh Wilson, but it might have been too soon. Boston College still had 30 seconds to go down the field and tie it up. However, it wouldn't matter because freshman linebacker Shredrick Bailey came up with this amazing interception and took it back to the house to secure our 6th win of the season. This was the most important game of the year, and if we wanted to make the ACC championship, we'd have to pull off the upset. Florida State started with a lead, but I was glad we held the Seminoles to just 3 on their opening drive. If Ronnie Mitchell was as fast as injured quarterback Bobby Babcock, this could have potentially been a touchdown run. However, since he wasn't, we had a lot more clock we could drain, and we scored with 2 minutes left in the half. That gave Florida State a lot of time still, but they didn't take advantage of it, so we could potentially get more points before the end of the second quarter, which is exactly what we were able to do. And since we got the ball to start the second half, we got to burn through even more clock, and I was super impressed with freshman 5-star recruit Mike Samuel here. He was going to be the starting halfback next season, and even though this 4th down play couldn't have gone worse, our defense was doing very well the few times they were on the field. I'm not quite sure why Florida State punted it to us here, but they'd never get the ball back after that, and we got our biggest win of the season. After starting the year 7-1, things were looking really good for the Cardinals, and I knew at the end of this season I was going to get a lot of job offers from even bigger programs, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to leave the Ville. So I'll have to make that decision at the end of the year, but for now, we were off to an amazing start against Syracuse, and if we won out in ACC play, we'd make the conference championship. To start the second quarter, I couldn't believe how wide open tight end Greg Smith got, but after Syracuse responded back instantly on the next drive, I hoped he could do it again. With 20 seconds left in the second half, it looked like our tight end couldn't quite get his feet in, but after it was reviewed, he was awarded the touchdown. We went up 6 to start the fourth quarter, and we were going to need to come up with a big stop sometime soon. Fortunately, on 4th and short, I called the perfect coverage needed to hold the orange, and that would seal the game for for us, which kept us ahead in the ACC race. Notre Dame scored within the first minute the following week, and even though they weren't having a good year, things were not going our way. We couldn't pick up this much needed first down, and after the play, Curtis Bruner wouldn't get up. Since we were already losing by 14, I felt like we had to go for it here, and thank goodness it worked, but with our starting running back out for the season with a torn Achilles, we could barely move the ball. I didn't quite know what to do offensively anymore, so we just settled for 3, and things would continue to go downhill from there with Notre Dame running up the score. Once we fell behind 18, we couldn't run the ball like we normally would, and we got exposed on the road. Even though this didn't count as an ACC loss, my team was without their starting quarterback and running back for the rest of the season, so we were in trouble. Even though Wake Forest only had won 2 games so far, they were giving us all sorts of issues as we only scored 3 in the first half. And even though my defense did a pretty solid job locking the Demon Deacons up, it just wouldn't be enough. They continued to score on us, and my offense was fighting their hardest to stay in it, but nothing seemed to be going our way. After being marked short, we had to take 3, and Wake Forest kept responding. I was proud of how the defense played, but offensively, it was a mess, and if you thought this loss hurt us, you should have seen the way my team walked off the field after this one ended. They played their hearts out, and they did their best to keep it close, but that still wasn't enough. Over 4 quarters, NC State proved that they were the better team, and I realized we had a lot of injuries, exceeded expectations, and got a little lucky, but after such a promising start, we didn't deserve to end our season like this. I couldn't believe we missed the ACC championship, and to end my 3rd year at Louisville, I had to coach in the Cheez-It Bowl. Even though things ended very differently than I would have liked, I have to mention all the positives from the season, and the first one is quarterback Bobby Babcock being back from injury next year. The freshman was the key to our offense and a great start, so having him healthy again will make things a lot better. And even though we gave up a touchdown here, the defense improved a ton. So I'm excited to see how next year goes with them playing this well and our starting QB back. Lastly, I have to mention the new offensive schemes that I've created. I think it's the biggest takeaway from the year, as I found something that works for us, and as long as we continue to improve, I'll be proud of this team, but we need to focus so we can end the season right. And I guess 9 wins and a Cheez-It Bowl trophy will do. I can't wait to see what this team has in store next year, and that's assuming I stay because I got a lot of good offers. I was going into my 7th season as a coach, and I was getting a lot of offers after I turned around Louisville's program. However, I didn't feel like it was time to leave the Cardinals yet, as sophomore quarterback Bobby Babcock was back from injury after he broke his vertebrae last year. And since he was undefeated as a starter, the sky was the limit for how good this team could be. Each season, I felt like I became a better head coach, and if we got a couple of lucky results, we had the talent to go all the way. So I was ready to get into our first game of the season against number 18 Miami, Ohio. Since Curtis Bruner, Tyler Starks, TJ Keith, and Greg Smith all graduated, the offense was full of new starters, and I thought Bobby Babcock was about to start the game with a huge play until he fumbled the ball away to the Red Hawks. Even though that turnover really hurt in the moment, it wouldn't end up causing us to lose today, as the option offense was still working better than ever with Mike Samuel taking it in. The last second pitches from Bobby Babcock to whatever running back was out there were golden, and additionally, sophomore star wideout Josh Wilson was still dominating opposing cornerbacks. So I could tell this was going to be a solid year as we beat a ranked team in our opener. Coaching in the biggest rivalry game in Kentucky was always a good time, especially because we were the favorites to win the Governor's Cup. Kentucky hadn't beaten me in years, and I was surprised the Wildcats hadn't offered me a job yet since I grew up a Kentucky fan. This game wasn't even close, and although my offense played well, I have to give credit to my defense, because they held the Wildcats to just 14 points in the rain. We started off great at Georgia Tech with senior kicker Isaac Cook nailing a 60-yarder, but my defense didn't show up, so it's a good thing that offensively things were running smoothly as freshman Jordan Brown scored his first collegiate touchdown. By the 3rd quarter though, it was tied, and Georgia Tech continued to dot up all of my defensive schemes. So you can imagine how excited I was when Bobby Babcock and Mike Samuel ran the read option to perfection to get us a huge 35-yard gain, which set us up to make it 24-24. And after we stopped the Yellow Jackets inches short on 3rd down, we had the ball in a lot of time that we needed to kill. But then Bobby Babcock pitched it a second too late, which resulted in a turnover, and partial man-to-man coverage was not the move as quarterback Eugene Grant took advantage of that. Fortunately, this Bobby Babcock run would tie it up, and that would send the game to overtime where defensively, All-American free safety Wesley Lumpkin laid the hammer, forcing a huge fumble, and even though senior Manuel Daniels couldn't take it back for 6, Isaac Cook would seal the game for us in one of my wildest coaching wins yet. But 3 of our next 4 games were top 25 matchups, so this could be a long few weeks, and I had to figure out how to get this team past number 10 Miami. We could have had an amazing start to the game, but we didn't, because Bobby Babcock didn't have a strong enough arm to make this throw. However, Wesley Lumpkin continued to prove why he was an All-American defender as he got an interception right back for us. That didn't help though, as we were stuck on the goal line and our poor punter got blasted for the safety. I could tell from the start that this game was going to be a defensive battle, and for every yard we wanted to gain, we had to fight extremely hard. So I decided we were going to control the clock like we did last year. And unfortunately, since it was 4th down, we only ended the half with 3. Like I said, this game was a defensive brawl, so with 4 minutes left, it was still 3-2. And since this would have been a 67-yard field goal, we had to punt, but that didn't matter because cornerback Daniel Hamilton read the Miami quarterback like a book, and our defense would seal the win for the 2nd week in a row. I couldn't believe this final score, but that win moved us into the top 10, and after a bye week, I was coaching against undefeated number 6 Clemson. This one was shaping up to be another defensive stalemate like the Miami game, so it's a good thing that Isaac Cook could kick like Harry Kane. We continued to get massive 3rd down stops, but after giving up 6 points and struggling to score, we went into the half tied with Clemson. It was obvious that the running game wasn't working well, and so after the Tigers went up by a touchdown at the end of the 3rd quarter, I had to start working in more passing plays, and future starter at tight end freshman Stephen Love took advantage of that. He hauled in his first ever collegiate touchdown, and then Wesley Lumpkin forced a huge 3rd down stop, which led to us setting up to pull off another tight win. Senior Isaac Cook got it done for us again, making him the first kicker I've ever seen win player of the game, and as the number 6 team in the country, we continued to play at a high level. So I felt bad for any Boston College fans that made the trip to Louisville because this one wasn't close. My offense put up 42 points on the Eagles defense, and it was due to a massive game from Mike Samuel. The next week, I was coaching with a spot in the ACC Championship on the line, and even though we were playing number 9 Florida State, whose only loss was Ohio State, Mike Samuel wasn't intimidated. He was on last year's team, which upset the Seminoles, and he wanted to contribute to that this time. But that wouldn't be easy because offensively, we couldn't get into the end zone, and Isaac Cook shanked a gimme. Florida State was making my offense look like I was, but then we finally got some life as Bobby Babcock took off and picked up this 3rd and 22. That play would lead to Mike Samuel tying it up before the half with this run, and I'd love to say we kept scoring, but we didn't. Our defense kept us in it through the 3rd quarter, but to win this game, somebody would need to step up soon. And on 3rd and 7, it was Josh Wilson who made the touchdown snag. We could have ended the game here if Daniel Hamilton just held on to this, but instead, it was decided when the Seminoles kicker mimicked Blair Walsh, and we somehow improved to 7-0. I couldn't believe I was the coach of a top 5 team because we had barely survived so many games, but in the end, all wins count the same, so despite our horrendous start, where we trailed the Orange by 17, I wasn't worried. Even though my offense was no longer working as well as it used to, Bobby Babcock and Josh Wilson were still able to make things happen, getting us within 3. And then, after holding Syracuse to a field goal, all we needed was a touchdown, but that didn't come easy as my option offense clearly wasn't getting the job done anymore. On 4th down, the Syracuse cornerback made a miraculous play, and after that, the game was in the hands of the defense. We could have gotten a stop too, but Wesley Lumpkin couldn't make a tackle on 3rd down, and despite how well he had been playing, this one hurt a lot. So even though Bobby Babcock finally made a play, rolling out and finding sophomore and former 5-star recruit Justin Carter for the long touchdown, we weren't able to recover the onside kick, which ruined our undefeated season and made the ACC race much closer. Now, if I wanted to get this team to the college football playoffs, we could not lose again, and that was proving to be quite the challenge. However, Wesley Lumpkin continued to force turnovers to keep us in it, so even though my offense took forever to score, by the end of the first half, we were in a great position because the Tar Heels had 0 points. In the 3rd quarter, they finally got on the board, but it was too late for a comeback as we just drained the rest of the clock and left Chapel Hill with a win. This was the best possible possible start we could have had against Wake Forest, as Wesley Lumpkin read the Demon Deacons quarterback like a book and took it all the way back to the house to give us an early lead. He was having an amazing defensive season, and the momentum he got us at the beginning of the game would carry us to a win, but we needed some serious help. Syracuse could win the ACC if they won out, so even if we won our last conference matchup, we didn't control our destiny, which was really concerning to me. Anyway, NC State put up a good fight, but after they settled for 3 here, it was a tie game, and that would be it for them because all we had to do was run out the clock and let senior Isaac Cook seal it for us. But the real question was, could the Seminoles beat Syracuse? And unfortunately, the answer to that would be no, so we had to pray the Orange loss next week. But first, I was coaching in my biggest game yet to end the regular season. The number 6 team in the country, Georgia, traveled to Louisville to play us, and even if we missed out on the ACC championship, winning this game could catapult us into the college football playoffs, so I was thrilled that we scored first on the Bulldogs. To end the quarter, sophomore Bobby Babcock threw an unlucky interception, but that backed Georgia up, which was so close to resulting in a safety, and even though we failed to block the punt, the turnovers would come. At this point, Wesley Lumpkin should be in the Heisman race with the number of turnovers he's forced this season, as we'd end up going up by 14, and even though Georgia would fight to stay in it, our defense was simply too strong, or so I thought. This missed tackle from Daniel Hamilton would give Georgia their first lead of the entire game, and all of a sudden, we needed a miracle from Bobby Babcock and this offense. With time winding down, he sent up a prayer to the 6'4" sophomore Justin Carter, and after he somehow came down with it, I knew we had to go for the win, and my aggressive play calling paid off. I could not believe my offense did that, but after Syracuse beat Boston College, our ACC championship hopes were destroyed. However, the college football playoffs were still possible, and we could potentially sneak in. Mike Samuel carried the offense this year, but in the end, it wasn't enough for a spot. So since we got snubbed from the college football playoffs, we had to play in the Rose Bowl against Navy, who somehow went 11-2 and was ranked 6th in the country. I couldn't believe this was how my 4th season at Louisville was going to end after how well I had coached all year, but on the bright side, almost everybody was returning next season, which meant that we could realistically make a championship run if I played my cards right. Senior Wesley Lumpkin ended his collegiate career with another interception, which was very fitting, and I brought the Rose Bowl trophy back to the Ville, where I was making a lot of progress as a coach. This was the best team I ever had at Louisville, and after a heartbreaking end to last season, where we went 12-1 and we were snubbed out of the college football playoffs, I knew I didn't want to feel that pain again. Additionally, I'm hoping I can finally bring an ACC championship home to Louisville this season, but it's time to see how good this team really is, as we were starting off the year on the road at number 14 Penn State. At the end of the first quarter, my offense was showing off how talented it was, with Bobby Babcock connecting with sophomore Jerome Brown for a 63-yard play, and then the junior took it in right after. However, the defense had taken a step back from last year, so that could end up being a big problem. Fortunately, even though we should have won by more, after Bobby Babcock and Jerome Brown hooked up for another massive play, we were in the perfect position to burn through the rest of the time on the clock and win in the final seconds. But I had to get everyone focused because I was coaching against Deion Sanders at Colorado, who had multiple seasons to turn them around. So this would not be an easy one to pull off, but I knew if we could avoid turning it over, we would probably be fine. So you can probably imagine how upset I was when Bobby Babcock threw a pick on our first drive. I chewed him out for it, and he made up for the turnover just minutes later as he led the offense down the field using his legs and getting us into the end zone with ease. Anyways, with 2 minutes left, it was still tied up, so that meant the game was in the hands of my defense and they needed to make a play for us, which they completely failed to do so. That left Bobby Babcock with less than a minute left to get us into the Buffalo's end zone, and he came so close to pulling it off, connecting with Jerome Brown, but even though the ball was across the line when he caught it, I wasn't able to challenge it, which meant we lost to Colorado. And you'd think that would ruin our playoff hopes, but it actually did the exact opposite. If we won out, we would win the ACC and make the college football playoffs, so that motivated the entire team as we played our best game yet. Kentucky had no counter to the read option, and our rivalry game couldn't have gone better, as this win was huge for keeping team morale up. After our great performance against the Wildcats, we were back on track to making the playoffs, and since we were playing at undefeated number 12 Georgia Tech, we had an opportunity to get a massive massive win. Bobby Babcock started off the game with this rushing touchdown, and I had finally figured out how I wanted to use him after I watched him lay this ball perfectly into the hands of Justin Carter. I realized that due to the threat of him running, I could freeze defenses up with play action plays, and if I'm being honest, Georgia Tech let him do whatever he wanted against them. Like I said, our one loss wouldn't ruin our playoff hopes, but instead, I think it was a great wake-up call as Bobby Babcock finished with 5 touchdowns and continued to dominate against Duke. From what I've seen so far, I think I need to make play action passing plays the main focus of my offense because they give Bobby Babcock the flexibility to do whatever he wants, and whenever he can't find an open receiver, he'll find a way to score anyway. We went into the half up 31, and even though we couldn't hold the Blue Devils scoreless, this was still an amazing win. However, our next matchup was extremely tough. My team was hosting undefeated number 3 Clemson, and this game would determine who wins the ACC. So obviously, I was not happy with how it started as we looked terrible, but I guess Bobby Babcock had it all under control, looking like Patrick Mahomes with deep bombs like this and scrambling in for touchdowns like he was Lamar Jackson. His development has been amazing as he continued to improve on the ground and in the air, and due to that, his draft stock was skyrocketing. So I knew this could be the last season Bobby Babcock plays college football, as he put up 52 on the Tigers. This win proved we were legit, and unfortunately for Eagles fans, we also confirmed that when we traveled to Boston and ran up the score on the worst team in the ACC, which kept us on top of the division and shot Bobby Babcock up the Heisman boards. My defense started against Florida State, forcing a safety, and we were off to an amazing start. However, it was tied by the end of the third quarter, and I just wanted to escape Doak S. Campbell Stadium with a win, but that wasn't looking likely. After Florida State took a lead, the game was in the hands of Bobby Babcock, and he hadn't been on today. So I was relieved that he moved us down the field despite all of his struggles and tied it up for us. Then, in overtime, we put the Seminoles in a box as Jamar Lilly forced a huge turnover, which obviously would completely seal the game for us. Freshman kicker Brian Watson put it away, and we escaped what would have been a big upset. Last season, Syracuse ruined our college football playoff and ACC championship hopes, so I was hoping that they wouldn't do that again this year. But they were ranked 9th in the country, only had 1 loss, and got on the board first, so this would not be an easy win for my Cardinals, especially because the rain had only seemed to hurt us so far. However, Bobby Babcock persevered anyway, tying the game up, but after he got run through by the Orange defense, he gave up a very costly turnover. Syracuse was our kryptonite, so luckily, Bobby Babcock's frustration with how the game was going just made him perform even better. That's one of the things that separates good quarterbacks from great ones, and he was proving that he could be relied on with it all on the line as we finally took the lead. But after our defense gave up another touchdown, and on top of that, the 2-point conversion, it looked like it was going downhill extremely fast for us. However, on 4th and 22, with the game on the line, Bobby Babcock laid the ball perfectly into the arms of Josh Wilson, and then Lee Washington made the play of the night, picking off the Syracuse quarterback, which would lead to us getting the win in the final seconds. That one almost gave me a heart attack, so I was ready to get through the last 3 regular season games of the year. In the first one against 1-8 Virginia Tech, it was a lot closer than I would have liked it to be, but Bobby Babcock made sure we kept putting up points and left with our 9th win, making us the number 1 team. We proved that we deserved to be there against Wake Forest as we safely continued our winning streak, and the last week of the regular season we played at NC State. Harvey Beck had taken over at halfback because Mike Samuel had been out with a strained back, but he would return by the ACC championship if we were able to make that game because we were struggling to take down the Wolfpack. It was a very close battle, but fortunately we pulled away in the end and finished the regular season 11-1. Obviously, we made the conference championship and I was ready to get into the postseason. I was coaching in my first ever ACC championship game and we scored the first touchdown. Not only was Miami unranked and 8-4 on the year, but they also had a kicker that didn't have a very strong leg, so I was ticked that approaching halftime they were beating us. I know my whole team was looking ahead to the college football playoffs, but there was no excuse for turning the ball over multiple times in the red zone, so fortunately, after I led a motivational halftime speech, Bobby Babcock and the offense turned it around as he took this run all the way into Miami Hurricane territory. Minutes later, he evaded the defense to put us up, but Miami took the lead on this touchdown run, so when Bobby Babcock delivered this dot with 30 seconds left, and my defense made sure that Miami didn't pull off the miracle Hail Mary play at the end of the game. I was pumped to bring an ACC championship to the Ville, but our work was not done yet, and I couldn't believe Bobby Babcock lost the Heisman. Our college football playoff semifinal matchup was against Florida Atlantic, so even though we gave up an early touchdown, I was pretty confident we'd win. With about 3 minutes left in the half, Bobby Babcock got us into the end zone, but I can't pretend like he was playing a very good game. On top of this, we failed to go into the half up 3, and even though the freshman kicker got us back on track, this was a much closer game than it should have ever been. Florida Atlantic was staying in it, running the option better than us, so it's a good thing that Bobby Babcock finally decided to come alive again. Recently, his draft stock had been tanking as he was down to a third-round prospect because there were a lot of concerns about if his game would translate well to the NFL. But bad news struck as he somehow tore his shoulder on that last play, which would rule him out for the national championship. So even though my defense clutched up and made sure that we got through to the final big game, we were in a lot of trouble because we were going to be playing against Ohio State. I was coaching in my first ever national championship game, but for the second year in a row, I was missing my starting quarterback when it mattered the most. Backup junior Daryl Johnson was responsible for trying to pull off a miracle win, and we did not start the game well. Even though Ohio State was the 4 seed, they won their semifinal game 58-14 over Air Force, so I was not surprised that Daryl Johnson was struggling against the Buckeyes. I just couldn't believe that Bobby Babcock was injured. I mean, I had to be the unluckiest coach in college football, but if I want any chance of pulling this off, I need to stop complaining. We weren't out of it yet, and this safety to start the third quarter was massive. On top of that, Mike Samuel was leading the offense down the field with his legs, and somehow we were able to take the lead. But it wouldn't last long. In fact, it lasted approximately 30 seconds because Daryl Johnson not only turned the ball over on this 2-point conversion, but let Ohio State take it all the way back to go up 16-15. From there, he was messed up in the head as he threw it to the wrong receiver, which also resulted in the Buckeyes taking it back to the house, but for 6 this time. So despite any last-minute attempts to try and fight our way back into the game, I fell just short of bringing a championship home to Louisville, and if I couldn't convince Bobby Babcock to stay for his senior year, I might be receptive to other coaching jobs, including the NFL. Can I coach Louisville to a national championship? Today, we'll find out if I can get my team over the hump after losing to Ohio State in the big game last year, and I have some amazing news going into this season. I convinced senior quarterback Bobby Babcock to return instead of entering the NFL draft, and he was ready to open up the year by getting revenge for us on the Buckeyes. Due to a shoulder injury, he missed the championship, so this was his first time playing against them, and Ohio State clearly didn't have an answer for him as he put us up 2 possessions early on. With about 90 seconds left in the half, our defense finally gave up a touchdown, but that just gave Bobby Babcock the time he needed to run around and move us down the field, which resulted in a Brian Watson field goal. I continued to call play action plays throughout the third quarter because the Buckeyes couldn't stop them, and by the way Bobby Babcock dominated, we definitely would have won it all last year if he was healthy. We left Columbus with a statement win, but instead of celebrating, I made my team practice extra because the following week we had some business to take care of. Deion Sanders outcoached me last season, so when Colorado came to town this year, I didn't want to lose to him again as I schemed up the perfect game plan to make sure that didn't happen. I remembered exactly what didn't work for us the last time we played, and I made sure we did the complete opposite of that. Ever since Travis Hunter left Colorado for the NFL draft a few years back, the Buffalo's cornerbacks hadn't been great, so even though George Washington was giving us a ton of issues, I made sure that Bobby Babcock abused those weak DBs all night as the senior from New Jersey, Justin Carter, had a field day. He finished with 167 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns as we doubled up the final score, and with the way Bobby Babcock was playing, he was shooting for a Heisman. Nobody else in the country could thread the needle quite like him, and his dual threat abilities were driving opposing defenses insane. I couldn't believe I had developed one of the best quarterback prospects of the decade, but he had come a long way and all he wanted to do was win an Natty. But we had to get there first though, because obviously the playoffs aren't guaranteed. This punt from senior Kyle Humphrey would pin the Hurricanes back on their own 2-yard line, and that led to a safety being the first points of the game. After that, we didn't score again until the end of the half, but Mike Samuel finally got his first touchdown of the year, and we were off to a 4-0 start. My team was in a rhythm, so unfortunately for Virginia fans, they weren't in for a good day, as Bobby Babcock continued to play like the best player in the country. Before halftime, he had already put up 5 touchdowns on the Cavaliers, and his Heisman odds just continued to increase. But we traveled to Death Valley the following week to take on number 7 Clemson, and this was always one of our hardest games of the year, so I was pumped that we got on the board first. The rest of the first half ended up being pretty boring, but at least we kept our lead, and we would continue to add on to it in the third quarter. The big difference in this game though was certainly my defense, as through 56 minutes of football, they'd only given up 1 touchdown to Clemson, and because of their resilience to hold the Tigers, we left Death Valley with our biggest win there ever, as we outscored them by 31 points. My defense was ranked as the best in the country after that, and I was so proud of how far this Louisville team had come over the course of 6 seasons. But I only had 1 year left on my contract, so I was going to explore other jobs at the end of the year. I knew I could demand a much larger bag, and I didn't show much of this matchup because Boston College's offense decided they didn't want to show up today. We embarrassed the Eagles, and that made Cardinal Stadium the 3rd toughest place to play. Anyways, I couldn't believe how we scored our first touchdown against Florida State. Bobby Babcock connected with Josh Wilson, and somehow, with 3 defenders surrounding him, he ended up breaking free and taking it in for a 75-yard touchdown. But that wasn't even his best play. At the end of the first quarter, he somehow pulled in this catch and accelerated with Tyreek Hill-like speed, and the senior from Maryland had 2 catches for over 150 yards and 2 touchdowns early on. And the craziest part was, he wasn't done after that. He caught another deep touchdown pass in the second quarter, and that put him in the Louisville record books. My Cardinals team was giving me 2019 LSU vibes, and I felt like a championship was getting close. Bobby Babcock somehow still wasn't the Heisman favorite, but he had a chance to change that. My team was playing at number 7 Syracuse, where we started the game by forcing a fumble, and even though the senior made a terrible decision going for the highlight play, we recovered the ball and it was time to get to work on the orange. Josh Wilson picked up right where he left off last week, cooking the cornerbacks, and on the other side, Justin Carter was putting in work too. By the end of the first half, this game was a blowout, and that's because my defense was putting on an almost perfect performance against Syracuse. They didn't give up any points until the end of the game, and I was so happy with all of my guys. At this point, my goal was to embarrass our biggest rivals, Kentucky, and I made sure my team knew I wasn't going to be satisfied unless we beat them by 50. Bobby Babcock continued to fight for the Heisman Trophy by scoring touchdowns like this, and for the second week in a row, we went into the half up 30-0, as Bobby now held the career passing touchdown record at Louisville. Touchdowns on my team's defense became so rare that they were more of a highlight than us scoring, and we won our 5th Governor's Cup in a row, which made Bobby Babcock the Heisman favorite. With 2 games left in the regular season, I was already ready to get into the postseason, but we still had to take care of business against other teams first, and you know we gave Wake Forest that good D. To end the first half, Bobby Babcock slung it 40 yards to find Justin Carter, but even though that put us up 35, I know as a Colts fan that no lead is safe. Fortunately, my defense was able to hold on to ours, so we made snowmen in the snow afterwards to celebrate. But our last game of the regular season couldn't have had a worse start than this. I got too aggressive with my play calling here, and we paid for it as nobody on my defense could catch the NC State running back. Additionally, Bobby Babcock turned it over on the goal line on this terrible read, and all of a sudden, my team, which had been playing perfectly for weeks, was starting to get complacent. I should have never let them celebrate after last week's win because it got to their heads, and we needed a 4th quarter miracle. Luckily for me, I had the best quarterback in the country running my offense, and that made this comeback actually possible as he continued to do amazing things. With 3 minutes left, we still needed to score again, and that's when junior running back Todd Dudley, who had been filling in for Mike Samuel for weeks because he broke his ribs, had this run. He was the hero we needed until he was stopped short on this 2-point conversion, and I should have put the ball in Bobby Babcock's hands, but our defense got a stop anyways, so he had his opportunity to get us in field goal range and beat the Wolfpack in the final seconds. With time winding down, he rolled out and found Todd Dudley for the massive game, and after he spiked it, Brian Watson secured the win. The ACC championship was a rematch of last year's, and Shredrick Bailey was was determined to get another one. The senior was one of the reasons we lifted the trophy last year, and it looked like we would do it again. Justin Carter became prime Odell Beckham Jr. for a second, and that was one of the best catches I had ever seen. My offense was capable of doing great things. Even though the defense was a little leaky today, it ended up being okay because Mike Samuel was finally back from injury, and Bobby Babcock was able to tear apart the Hurricanes defense with his incredible arm. Back-to-back ACC championships felt so good, but winning a national championship would be so much better, and I was glad Bobby Babcock got to lift the Heisman Trophy. The college football playoffs opened up with us facing Troy, and I couldn't have asked for a better start as Justin Carter went for 73 yards on the first play of the game. That set Bobby Babcock up to run around and make some magic happen, but even though everything looked like it was going our way, by the third quarter, Troy got it within one possession by finding the end zone here, so we needed a response, and sure enough, the senior, Justin Carter, created loads of separation as this play put him over 1,000 receiving yards on the year, and from there, Bobby Babcock would continue to lead my offense with confidence, finding junior tight end Stephen Love over the top of the Trojan defense as we would seal our ticket to the big game, but the real question would be, who would we play? Ohio State and Tennessee still had to face off, and with 2 minutes left, the Volunteers had a 4-point lead, but they couldn't stop the Buckeyes running game, so they'd have to get down the field if they wanted to keep their championship hopes alive. On 4th and 2, Tennessee's running back got obliterated in the backfield, so Ohio State moved on. This year's national championship game was a rematch of last year's, and I was determined to coach my team to a win against the Buckeyes this time. We beat them earlier in the season 37-13, so I felt pretty confident coming into this one, and so did Bobby Babcock. I called a triple option, he kept the ball, and the rest is history. He flew by everybody on the field for a 57-yard rushing touchdown, but Ohio State responded right back with one of their own, so it was my turn to coach my team into the end zone. I thought a halfback screen would work really well, and sure enough, it did just that. On top of that score, my team got another one with a couple minutes left in the half because they tried to press senior receiver Josh Wilson, and I guess they learned nothing from that play because with 25 seconds left in the half, they put the same guy one-on-one with Josh Wilson again, and he simply couldn't keep up with him. At the end of the day, Bobby Babcock was just too difficult to stop, and I won my first national championship at Louisville. I was also given the Coach of the Year award, so I was set to get paid a ton this offseason, but the real question would be, where would I be coaching at next year? It was time for a new chapter in my career. After coaching at Louisville for 6 seasons, winning multiple ACC championships for the Cardinals, and bringing home a national championship as well, I was set to get a massive payday. Obviously, Louisville wanted me back, but I also had other offers from Kentucky, Oklahoma, Texas, and UCLA. I really wanted to stay in the state, but I couldn't pass up on my biggest offer, $80 million over just 5 years. So I signed a contract to be the Bruins' new head coach, and they had been in the loaded Big Ten for a while now. Since they had been struggling far before I arrived, this was going to be a rebuild, but fortunately, my first game there was against Illinois State, an FCS school, so getting off to a good start wasn't difficult, but my main focus this season had to be recruiting new talent. Big Ten play began when I had to coach against number 11 Michigan, and it couldn't have started worse as we fell behind 7 after that pick. Junior quarterback Todd Carrington was ready to bounce back though, and somehow Jay Butler came down with this catch. To follow that up, freshman wide receiver Tom Reed got wide open in the end zone for an easy 6, and it was tied going into halftime, but unfortunately that wouldn't last. Running back Greg Ridgway finally broke off a decent run here, but it was immediately pulled back because of a penalty, so I had to call some passing plays, and the Wolverine defense locked all of our receivers up. By the fourth quarter, we finally got the ball back, and that's when freshman Greg Ridgway started to show flashes of how good he could potentially be. He was young, so I wasn't expecting much of him this season, and since his offensive line sold on 4th down, we failed to tie it back up, and Michigan gave us our first loss. The next week, my team was hosting Illinois, who didn't have a win yet this season, so this should be an easy one for us, but Todd Carrington didn't seem to think so. He was blind, which made me desperate to find a quarterback in recruiting this season, and even though George Thomas would extend our lead here, by the end of the first half, we would blow it by giving up a touchdown. With 3 minutes left in the game, Jay Butler would find some space to get into the end zone, but we weren't able to successfully convert the 2-point conversion, so we needed our defense to get a stop, and this tackle from sophomore Chris McFarland was huge. We were were getting the ball back, and all we needed was a field goal to win. Somehow, freshman Tom Reed got wide open just like he did against Michigan, and he would run with it all the way down to the Illinois 20. From here, my plan was to run out the clock and kick the game winner, but Greg Ridgway had other ideas as he ran this one in, so we had to get a stop on defense, and it was going to be a close finish. With 5 seconds left, Illinois had one final chance to win it, but we knocked it down and we got some confidence back. You know it's a video game when Rutgers is undefeated, but even they didn't know how to stop Jay Butler, who kept catching touchdown passes. At halftime, it was tied at 14, and Jay Butler was balling as he went over 100 yards with this catch. My offense was starting to figure it out, but defensively, we were letting the Scarlet Knights score too easily, so once again, this was going to be a tight one. With 2 minutes left, Jay Butler put us up by 10, but Rutgers scored, so we needed one more first down to seal it, and we got it. My UCLA team was now 3-1, and we had a very important visit week coming up. There were multiple 5-star recruits coming in, and I had to throw for 250 yards and rush for 100 yards if we were going to land some commits, but more importantly, we had to win this game, and Minnesota was not going to make that easy. 6'6" wide receiver Andre Pittman got thrown out there for a kick return because Tom Reed was out for the game with an ankle he bruised at practice, and he made the most out of that opportunity with a 106-yard kickoff return, but by the fourth quarter, we were trailing the Gophers by 2, and we only had 30 rushing yards. On top of that, we were still well under 250 passing yards as well, so the only thing we could strive to do was win. With about 2 minutes left in the game, Todd Carrington found Sean Lee for the go-ahead touchdown, but Minnesota worked it all the way down the field in what felt like just seconds, so we needed a clutch goal line stop, and we failed to get it. Their kicker put them up by 1, and we had limited time to move the ball, but somehow Todd Carrington found Andre Pittman for a 36-yard gain, and he hooked up with him again on the next play to get us in field goal range, where George Thomas would seal it for us. I was so proud of my team's efforts, and the visiting recruits were impressed, as 2 5-stars Jamie Sears and Dan Cox committed to the program. Surprisingly, we were also leading the division, and my new UCLA team could actually win the Big Ten, but we would have to play perfectly. Before we get back into conference games, we had to take on California on the road, and the rainy conditions along with a couple of turnovers were putting us in a bad position. My offense wasn't able to break down the Golden Bears defense, and we only had 3 points at the half while Cal continued to shove it down our throats. By the fourth quarter, we were trailing by 14, and we showed signs of a potential comeback, but this underthrow from Todd Carrington would pretty much end it, and I was furious that we dropped this game. Even though UCLA was in the Big Ten now, we continued to face old conference opponents, and we started off against number 11 Stanford with the luckiest touchdown. Honestly, I couldn't believe it, but Todd Carrington was starting to grow on me with throws like this to Jay Butler, and I was glad to see the defense bouncing back after last week's loss at Cal. They were giving us a great chance at pulling off the upset, along with Tom Reed, the freshman that kept getting better, as his layout catch set Greg Ridgway up for a touchdown run. And if we could have held Stanford here, we would have had almost the perfect first half, but that didn't happen, and in fact, we would continue to collapse near the end of the second quarter. We were very lucky to hold Stanford to just 3 here, and in the second half, Todd Carrington tried to find Tom Reed over the top like he had been doing, but it didn't work this time, and that turnover would contribute to our embarrassing downfall where we blew our 21-3 lead. However, we fully locked up the 2-point conversion attempt, and that gave us a chance to win it, but Todd Carrington panicked when nobody was open, turning it over, so now we had to get a stop here, and I'd love to say that we did, but instead, it looked like we needed practice tackling. My offense did have one more opportunity to tie it up after that, so I'll let you all witness this amazing drive where we got stuck on a 4th and 19 that we couldn't convert. My team successfully blew an 18-point lead, but at least the division was still wide open. It's weird to think about, but despite being 4-3, we were leading the Big Ten West, and since a 5-star quarterback was visiting today, that made this the most important game of the entire season. We had to throw for 250 yards against Wisconsin, so I was letting Todd Carrington sling the rock, and he got us into the end zone early. With 3 minutes left in the second quarter, he threw it up to 6'6" receiver Andre Pittman, and I watched him go to work on the Badgers. He was our leading receiver on the day with 201 receiving yards, and Tom Reed also had a good afternoon alongside him. Our defense was able to hold strong on multiple goal line stops in the fourth quarter, and that allowed us to cruise to victory, which made 5-star quarterback Robert Armstrong commit to the school Football along with other insane prospects. That gave us the #1 recruiting class in the country, and we were even farther ahead in the Big Ten now. Iowa was the next team we had to take down, and we were actually trailing the Hawkeyes until the end of the third quarter, but soon after that, the game opened up for us, and I'll just let this play speak for itself. This shows exactly why we have overperformed so much, as you can see the heart in all of my players, and that's the reason we are already bowl eligible. Nebraska was actually back by the year 2033, so we needed to focus because the Big Ten West was on the line today, and it wasn't going to be easy without starting running back Greg Ridgway, who was out for a few weeks with a sprained wrist. With 15 seconds left in the first half, Todd Carrington found Andre Pittman for a 44-yard game-tying touchdown, and things looked like they were starting to swing our way. My defense caused Nebraska's quarterback to lose the ball here, but instead of scoring, my quarterback got run through, and then we ended up giving up back-to-back touchdowns to the Huskers, so we were put in a position where we needed to come back fast and nothing was going our way. I never thought I'd see the day where Nebraska was back on top, but I did, and it hurt badly because now we had to pray they lost a game so we'd make the Big Ten championship. We ended up playing very well on the road against Northwestern, and even though I should be thrilled with this result, it's not the one that really matters to us. We needed Nebraska to drop a game, but that didn't happen against Minnesota, and Wisconsin kept it close all day, but they couldn't pull it off either, so there was only one more chance for them to blow it. I also found it amusing that Louisville wasn't as successful without me, but anyways, before we found out the Huskers' final result, I wanted to win my first victory bell as a head coach. USC was ranked, so I knew it would be a tough battle, and it didn't help that Jay Butler started the game by dropping a first down pass which led to a Trojan touchdown. We kept getting stuck in 3rd and long situations that we weren't able to convert, and that caused us to fall behind by 17. To end the first half, junior Todd Carrington finally got a drive going for us, but he couldn't throw away the ball in the final seconds, so we didn't even get a field goal. Throughout the third quarter, we continued to get embarrassed by the Trojans, and I'm not going to blame our recent struggles on Greg Ridgway being hurt, but he was greatly missed, and this loss ruined our Big Ten championship hopes. Even though I was glad we made a bowl game in year 1, I wished we would have won our division. Next season was going to be great though, especially with all of the talented incoming recruits, so at least we had that to look forward to in the very near future. In my first bowl game at UCLA, I was going to get splurged in mayo if we won, so I was conflicted. I didn't really want to get a facial of white stuff, but it also wouldn't be the end of the world if we won. To end the first half, Todd Carrington showed off his accuracy, completely missing Tom Reed, and there's a good chance he would be the backup to the 5-star freshman next year. Anyways, it was nice to see Greg Ridgway back and healthy, and sophomore Chris McFarland added to his highlight season with this interception. Unfortunately for me though, I was on the brink of getting soaked. After that turnover, Todd Carrington would find Jay Butler for a 69-yard play that flipped the field, and Greg Ridgway would happily finish the job with this run. However, we didn't get the 2-point conversion, and Virginia Tech scored immediately, so that left the game in the hands of Todd Carrington, and he froze up, taking back-to-back sacks, which made it 4th and 30. There was still a chance we could have converted it, but he threw an abysmal pass, so I wasn't going to be getting drenched in mayo. I felt like I had a decent first season at UCLA, but we had to do better than 7-6 next year. We are going to attempt to win a Big Ten championship. The wealthy boosters assisted me in bringing in the #1 recruiting class in the country, so I feel like we can completely overachieve our preseason projections. Our best freshman is definitely 6'6" Robert Armstrong, who is massive, and he's going to be our starting quarterback to open up the season over senior Todd Carrington. He scored the first touchdown of the day, and if we're going to win a Big Ten championship by the end of this video, beating Fresno State is a necessity because we should be able to obliterate them. Anyways, running back Greg Ridgway found the end zone here, but my defense was allowing the Bulldogs to stay in it, so holding them just short on the 2-point conversion attempt was huge. Then right after that, I was left speechless over on the sidelines. I watched sophomore cornerback Caleb Thomas embarrass the entire Fresno State special teams unit, and not only would that put us up by 12, but it would seal the game for us, and Robert Armstrong started his career with a win. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Rutgers was ranked 6th in the country, but once again, Caleb Thomas was breaking on off some long returns, so that put us in a great position to take an early lead on the Scarlet Knights. And I have to say, the offense felt even more alive this year. Now that we had a real threat at quarterback, the running game opened up, and Greg Ridgway was making a name for himself as he continued to find the end zone. It was 28-7 at the half, and I didn't even feel like I was coaching against a top 6 opponent. We got every stop that we needed to continue to hold on to our lead late in the fourth quarter, and this was an enormous win for the program. We were actually capable of winning our division, and I was one win away from completing one of my goals. But there was a slight problem. We had to play against another top 10 team, and unlike Rutgers, Ohio State isn't fraudulent, so this one could be difficult. It started out as a defensive battle, holding each other to 3, and it stayed that way for a while, but once I saw how much of a cannon Robert Armstrong had on this 62-yard bomb to Andre Pittman, I decided it was time to stop focusing on the checkdowns and start looking for the big, deep plays. We went into the half down by 3, and by the third quarter, I realized maybe we should go back to checkdowns, because if we hadn't been given Ohio State that good D, it wouldn't be close. See, we continued to force huge turnovers like this fumble in the fourth, but we had only scored 3 points in the second half, and time was winding out, so I made sure we had the final possession. With 10 seconds left, it was time to see if the risk paid off, and Jay Butler got open for the win, which got my team another top 10 victory and moved us up to 14 in the polls. I felt like I was coaching a really special team, and even though Robert Armstrong still had some freshman struggles, he was only going to continue to improve. I thought we were going to have an easy win over Northwestern, but they fought back in the fourth quarter, and with about 2 minutes left on the clock, Robert Armstrong laid a gift into the hands of the Wildcat cornerback. So now, with the game on the line, it was all on my defense, and on fourth down, we needed one more stop, and we got it here, which allowed us to improve to 4-0. And my team was hosting our rivals, California, who was ranked in the AP poll, so I was thrilled with this start. But unfortunately, that was the last good moment of the first half. The Golden Bears rushing attack was giving us all sorts of issues with Andrew Jackson leading the way, and offensively, we couldn't get anything going, so we ended the second quarter down by 11 points. I'd love to say that my halftime speech turned everything around, but that would be lying. Defensively, we just couldn't stop the run, and for some reason, my guys were making simple mistakes. So even though Robert Armstrong balled out in the second half with big plays like this one to sophomore receiver Tom Reed, we just continued to get unlucky, like Jay Butler being a yard short on fourth down, and we picked up our first loss of the year. But fortunately, it didn't affect our conference record. 6 of our last 7 games were against ranked opponents, so winning the Big Ten wouldn't be easy, especially because everybody seemed to be so good. I mean, even Illinois was ranked, and it took us a while to pull away in this game, but we luckily got the bounce back win that we needed, and it was behind Robert Armstrong's 5 touchdowns. But the biggest game I would coach in this season was starting right now, because if we beat Wisconsin, we would be on top of the Big Ten West. And due to that, everybody was on their A game today, including Tom Reed, aka Odell Beckham Jr. Through just 2 quarters, the sophomore had 2 amazing touchdown plays on the Badgers defense, so I was livid we went into the half down by 14. Offensively, everything looked great as Greg Ridgway continued to play well, and Robert Armstrong continued to throw lasers, but when you give up 55 points, including the refs giving a home field advantage, there's no way you can win. I mean, the refs literally watched this play and said it was a touchdown, even after saying it wasn't originally, so I'm blaming this one on the defense and the refs. It hurt to see us fall from our #1 spot in the division, but assuming Wisconsin lost one more this year, the race for the Big Ten West title was far from over. And since we had multiple 5-star recruits visiting today, we had 2 challenges to complete today, and the first one was getting over 100 receiving yards with our tight ends. Honestly, I didn't think it would be easy since Robert Armstrong loves to spread the ball out to the entire offense, but sophomore Rick Young was determined to complete the challenge, so a 5-star tight end would commit, and I'm not quite sure why, since that meant he'd have more competition at his spot. Anyways, the other challenge was to rush for over 100 yards with star running back Greg Ridgway, and with his explosive speed, this one should be cake. He was already well over halfway there, and while trying to complete these objectives, we were scoring too, so we could come out of this game with a ton of wins if we continued to perform this well. On this play, we completed the first challenge with tight end Rick Young going over 100 yards, and to start the fourth quarter, Greg Ridgway went over 100 rushing yards on the day. So we nailed all of our objectives in visit week, which would lead to a ton of amazing recruits committing, and on top of that, we were going to win, which kept our Big Ten championship hopes alive and led to 8 highly ranked recruits committing to the program. The next week, our success continued against Nebraska as we were moving the ball really well against them. Robert Armstrong was slinging it comfortably, and we left Nebraska 7-2, which put us on top of the division since Wisconsin lost. Now, all we had to do to make the Big Ten championship was win out in conference play, and I was loving the big playability of this team. Junior Jay Butler took this one 51 yards to the house after fighting off a tackle, and midway through the third quarter, after having all day outside of the pocket, Robert Armstrong hooked up with him again for a 32-yard touchdown. Iowa's offense just wasn't good enough to give us any issues, as we picked up win number 8 of the year. And now we were climbing up the polls, so not only could we win the Big Ten, but we could also still make the college football playoffs. The sky was the limit for us, and I know they aren't having a good year, but the fact that we went into Notre Dame and dominated speaks volume. This one wasn't ever a close game, and we had a ton of momentum that we needed desperately because we were playing our in-state rivals USC to end the regular season, and they obliterated us last year, so we needed to bounce back. But this was the opposite of the start that we needed today. The Trojans went up 14 as my defense missed easy tackles, and after we fumbled the kickoff, it just continued to get worse. Quarterback Robert Armstrong managed to hit the goalpost before he hit a receiver in the end zone, so I was relieved when Jay Butler miraculously hauled this one in. But we still went into the half down by 21, and after we gave up another touchdown to start the third quarter, I felt almost hopeless. There was absolutely nothing that went our way today, and I mean absolutely nothing, so we got embarrassed by USC again. But there was good news. Because of these standings, somehow I got the team to the Big Ten championship in just my second year here. And the conference must have been terrible this season because we were playing 7-5 Penn State, who surprisingly actually made our defense look respectable. Also, I have to note that 6'6" Robert Armstrong running hard downhill like this is very intimidating, and I never knew that he actually had some wheels on him. Once again, our defense held strong here, and I was so proud of their performance so far. They hadn't had a good season, but their resilience today allowed my offense to flourish when it was needed, and without the pressure of having to score to stay in it, we were doing well. Greg Ridgway increased our lead to 15 here, and we ran away with it from there. I brought UCLA their first Big Ten championship in program history, and it wouldn't have been possible without Robert Armstrong. He had an incredible freshman year, and it was because he was surrounded by a ton of talent. Unfortunately, we missed the playoffs, but to end the season, we got to play Houston in the Cotton Bowl, and Junior Jay Butler was ready to end his collegiate career with a bang since he was leaving for the NFL draft a year early. He would definitely be missed next season, but it meant new guys would get to step up, and I was excited for the future of this team with Robert Armstrong at the helm. He was honestly a beast, and he led us to a massive bowl game win as he put up his best stat line yet, which let me end my second season at UCLA on a good note. It was only my third year in Los Angeles, but I had brought in the #1 recruiting class for the second year in a row, and after winning a Big Ten championship last season, we were projected to be a top 10 team. Additionally, quarterback Robert Armstrong had an incredible offseason, and even though Tom Reed was the only returning starting wide receiver, there were 4 other former 5-star recruits behind him, so we had a ton of depth. And unfortunately for Colorado State fans, they found that out the hard way today. Sophomore Sean Johnson caught his first collegiate touchdown ever here, and then the freshman Jimmy Babcock did the same the next possession, who's obviously not related to Bobby Babcock. I mean, even Kevin Martin caught his first touchdown, who is also a freshman, and I know it's Colorado State, but it seemed obvious that we were going to have an amazing year as the offense looked practically unstoppable with all of these new receiving threats. We definitely took care of business, and although that was a nice start to have, everything was on the line the next week because I returned to Louisville to coach against my old team, and some of my old players weren't happy to see me. The Cardinals had been on a decline ever since I left, and even though they hadn't been terrible, they hadn't won an ACC championship or made the college football playoffs ever since I left the Ville. Midway through the third quarter, we actually found ourselves down by 14 points, and I was starting to get worried that I was going to get outcoached by my old defensive coordinator. However, Robert Armstrong and Tom Reed came up extremely clutch on a long 4th and 10, and we were able to get right back into it. By the fourth quarter, we were fighting to tie it up, and Sean Johnson continued to show off his big playability, taking this one for over 50 yards, and that set us up perfectly just for Jimmy Babcock to drop this touchdown. His freshman side was showing tonight, and that was going to cost us the game in the end, which was extremely frustrating. If we wanted to make the college football playoffs now, we would probably have to win out, and we had to play at the Big House next. Robert Armstrong ended up delivering a laser to get us on the board first, but Michigan was very quick to respond back, and the drops just continued to haunt us. I couldn't stand coaching in the rain anymore, and if we lost because of that again, I was going to completely lose it. After that score, Michigan ended the first half with a kick return for a touchdown, and they just kept getting lucky, like recovering this fumble. So honestly, it wasn't looking good for us at all. But Greg Ridgway scored here, and he kept our hopes alive. With about 2.5 minutes left, we were still behind 10 until tight end Rick Young held on to this one. So we had our chance, and all we needed was one more stop, which we got, putting the game in the hands of my offense. I couldn't believe Dan Cox attempted a one-handed catch in this scenario, but I didn't even have a chance to get upset at him about it because just a couple of plays later, Robert Armstrong made an incredible run for us, and that set up this game-winning touchdown to Sean Johnson. I couldn't believe we escaped with a win, but that was what we needed to get back on track because the rest of our schedule was extremely tough. I was starting to think that we were the unluckiest team in college football. I mean, how did we go from what should have been a 4th down stop to giving up a 16-yard run? Frustrating stuff like that is why we started off down 10 to Penn State, but Greg Ridgway wanted to get us back in it, and he got wide open for an easy touchdown here, but that didn't matter. Instead, Robert Armstrong would throw the pass of the century to the other team, and we would fall behind by even more points to the Nittany Lions off of multiple missed tackles. Fortunately, we did end the first half with a touchdown of our own, and I was thrilled that we opened up the third quarter by Tom Reed pulling off a huge play, but once again, I just felt like the universe didn't want us to win. Sean Johnson dropped what would have been 6, and if it weren't for an interception that put us in scoring range, we wouldn't be in it. With 2 minutes left, we actually got the ball back from the Nittany Lions, and I hated that every game recently was coming down to the wire, but at least we had a chance, and it all came down to the final play where Robert Armstrong showed off his clutch gene. We barely got by Penn State at home, and the difficult games were never ending as we were hosting undefeated Nebraska in the rain, so you know there were a ton of drops. Fortunately, we were the first team to get on the board though, and I'm not quite sure why Nebraska was ranked 11th in the country because their defense was atrocious. They went into the half down by 7, and that was the closest they'd ever get as Dan Cox and Robert Armstrong were hooking up for unbelievable plays. We ended up scoring 49 points, and since a load of recruits visited the school this week, we pulled in a ton of commits. Ever since I started coaching at UCLA, we had never beaten Cal, but I couldn't watch that happen for the 3rd time in a row as this team was far too talented for that. With less than 2 minutes left in the first half, we had held the Golden Bears to 0 points and we were moving the ball, but Wendell Johnson went for a one-handed grab for no reason, so we had to settle for a field goal. By the 4th quarter, Cal finally scored, and that's when the game turned into the Greg Ridgway show. He put us in a position to go up by 6 points, and now the result was in the hands of our defense, who should have ended it here, but instead they waited until 4th and inches to somehow get the stop, and we got to leave Berkeley with a massive win. The following week at Illinois, Robert Armstrong was on his A game as he had 4 passing touchdowns before the end of the half, and he would have had more if it weren't for the rain. I mean, Sean Johnson was just selling all day for him, but in the end it wouldn't matter because my offense still outscored Illinois by plenty of points. Greg Ridgway had a couple of nice touchdown runs, and we were now 6-1, which tied us for the top of the division. Since we were both undefeated in conference play, this game alone could decide who won the Big Ten West, and we got off to a great start. Greg Ridgway had already found the end zone twice, and we went into the half up by 4, so I was happy with how we were playing. I knew we couldn't lose to Wisconsin again like we did last year, and with the way Robert Armstrong was playing for us today, I knew he felt the exact same way. With about 4.5 minutes left, we needed to get a goal line stand, and we were holding up pretty well. By 3rd down, they still hadn't scored, but of course, in the end, it wouldn't matter. Anyways, at least we stopped the Badgers on the 2-point conversion, but after they held us to just 3 points, they had a chance to go down the field and send it to overtime. However, safety Cole Morton had other ideas. Not only did the senior get his 2nd interception of the day here, but he hit another gear as he accelerated past everybody on Wisconsin and sealed the game for us. Now that we led the Big Ten West, all we had to do was win out in conference play, and with how good our offense is, I think that's more likely than not. Greg Ridgway was on it today, and he just kept scoring, so beating Northwestern wasn't too hard. He was actually on the Heisman watch list, and the odds of him winning weren't great, but if he kept this up, who knows what could happen. Greg Ridgway was him, and he's the only reason we were able to outscore the Minnesota Gophers as he was a threat on the ground and in the air. He had 4 total touchdowns in our win, and we were climbing the polls, titles, but Iowa had been one of the best teams in the Big Ten for years now, so winning at Kinnick Stadium was always a challenge. Luckily, junior Tom Reed finally did something for the first time in weeks, and even if he was a little bit of an inconsistent performer, when he was on, it was well worth having him on the team. By midway through the third quarter, my offense continued to find their way into the end zone, but it still all came down to one final possession where junior Dustin Noel forced this turnover. From there, it was all on Greg Ridgway to burn through the rest of the clock, which he did, putting us at 10 wins on the year. I had never beaten USC in my time as the Bruins head coach, but I was ready for a change, and Sean Johnson silenced the Trojans' home crowd with this 90-yard touchdown. I couldn't think of a better way that we could have started this rivalry game, as we took a 2-possession lead with 2 minutes left in the first half, and for the first time ever, beating USC actually seemed possible because we controlled the entire game from start to finish. I won the victory bell for the first time, and now it was time for the conference championship games. Robert Armstrong actually regressed this year, but as a team, we played better, so I think that's why we still ended up being successful. Anyways, the Big Ten championship was set, and we were taking on number 6 Maryland, who only had 1 loss this season, so I was thrilled that Jimmy Babcock got us on the board first. He had a decent role for this team as a freshman, but this was the best I'd seen him play all season, and I was shocked at how easily we were rolling through the Terrapins. I mean, it wasn't even close, and it took Maryland almost 3 quarters to finally score. Obviously, we held on to win our 2nd straight Big Ten championship, and that put us into the college football playoffs as a 2 seed, but unfortunately, it didn't get us a Heisman winner. I finally got UCLA into the playoffs, and our first game was against Alabama, but we started on a bad note as we fell behind 14 early. However, things turned around pretty fast. To start the second quarter, Robert Armstrong put this throw perfectly on the money to sophomore receiver Dan Cox for a 70-yard touchdown, and we were on a mission to hold the Crimson Tide to just 3, which we were able to do, so that gave us the ball back with time to score before the half, and of course, my offense delivered. Alabama started the second half by scoring 6 on us, and on the other side of the ball, they were dominating, so with 3 minutes left, we were trailing by 13 until Robert Armstrong threaded the needle to Tom Reed. After that, we had to get a stop to get the ball back, and I don't know how he escaped this tackle, but in the end, my defenders didn't shoot the gaps right, and that would be the end of our season. We were put out of the playoffs by Alabama, who would lose to Syracuse in the championship, and I knew I had a lot of work to do in the offseason. We are projected to go all the way this year, and we even have 2 of the 5 preseason Heisman candidates, but we have to start the year playing at number 4 Miami, and their quarterback, Jermaine Taylor, is also in contention for the Heisman. He led the Hurricanes offense down the field on their first drive, resulting in a touchdown, and surprisingly, after that, Robert Armstrong began his junior year with an interception, which meant we were starting down 13. On top of that, junior cornerback Jimmy Fine fumbled the ball away on the kickoff return just seconds later, so I was fuming on the sidelines. It was like my team decided to show up and let Miami win, but then we got our lucky break. Somehow, this ball hit off the returner's chest, we recovered it, and that led to a Greg Ridgway rushing touchdown. However, things continued to not go our way, like Dan Cox fumbling, so I was very pleased we went into the half only down by 5. Robert Armstrong was making school history today, and he seemed to finally get back into his rhythm throughout the third quarter. With 2 minutes left, we were so close to taking a lead over the Hurricanes, yet we were stuck on 4th down after back-to-back drops. So luckily, Tom Reed got wide open for the go-ahead touchdown, but it was still very far from being over, as it would all come down to if our defense could get a stop on Jermaine Taylor or not. With a minute left, Trey Murphy burned All-American senior Dustin Noel for a 52-yard score, and that gave the Hurricanes a lead, but he had a chance to immediately redeem himself on the kickoff. He would get all the way past midfield before being brought down, and that field positioning was all that we ever needed. Robert Armstrong stepped up and laid this perfectly into the hands of Tom Reed, which in turn would be enough to leave Hard Rock Stadium remaining as the number 1 team in the country. Obviously, this would be a long season, but as long as we kept getting wins, we would cruise into the college football playoffs. However, we always run into issues, and I wasn't sure how we were going to deal with this one. Greg Ridgway strained his back earlier in the game, and that meant we would have to finish the regular season without our star starting running back. Joseph Miles could fill in, but it certainly wasn't going to be ideal for us. We finished the first half down by 10 points, so I was relieved that Jimmy Babcock began the third quarter by fighting his way into the end zone. He was having quite the game today, going for over 100 receiving yards on on the Spartans, and with about 4 minutes left, we took our first lead. Even though we needed to hold them, the Michigan State offense kept pulling off miraculous third down plays, so I was glad that somehow forward progress didn't exist on fourth down here. From there, Joseph Miles just ran out the rest of the clock, and we escaped another close one, but I had to get the guys playing right during practice because we were hosting number 6 Ohio State next, and of course it had to be raining pretty hard. But sometimes that worked in our favor as the Buckeyes dropped numerous potential interceptions. However, Robert Armstrong was really determined to throw one, and that meant Ohio State got on the board first. I don't know why he had been struggling. His throws were just a bit off, so I decided to make him run the ball instead. And since I'm an amazing coach, we ended up taking a 2-possession lead because of it. The defense was holding strong today, and then after Robert Armstrong saw Dan Cox streaking wide open around midfield, we got in field goal range. Unfortunately, freshman Brent Tyson didn't quite have the leg for it, but we were still up by 8 points, and we got the ball to start the third quarter so we could do some serious damage if we could find the end zone here. Sure enough, that's what Justin Galloway did, and we were completely controlling this one as our defense played on a whole other level today, holding Ohio State to just 6 points. Notre Dame's quarterback jumped up to the best Heisman candidate, so this had to be a bounce back game for Robert Armstrong against Northwestern, and ideally the only goal of this video is to win a championship, but a Heisman trophy would definitely be the icing on the cake. Before the end of the first quarter, the Wildcats had already scored more than Ohio State did, but their defense was also shaky, blowing coverage and giving up a wide open 47-yard touchdown to senior Tom Reed. Armstrong continued to hook up with him in the end zone throughout the day, so Tom Reed got to go down in the school record books. Brent Tyson even came on and hit a 50-yarder for us, and if any Northwestern fans made the trip out to Los Angeles, I feel bad for them. They weren't prepared to take on my tough Bruins defense, and with Tom Reed going for 4 touchdowns, it was obvious what the result would be. By the way, you all asked for more detail on the games in the comments, so I'd love to hear feedback on how you all like this video, because I'm trying to show more plays and tell even more of a story. Anyways, we have the college football playoffs to make, and there wasn't any doubt in my mind that we'd come out and throttle Wyoming. The poor Cowboys couldn't even figure out how to move the ball on our Big Ten defense, and if we're being honest, this one was never going to be a fair matchup. It was the Robert Armstrong show all day, and I decided it was probably best to play the backups the entire second half. Second string quarterback Jamie Sears was going to have to step it up for us next season since Robert Armstrong was going into the NFL early, and I thought he looked pretty good. We finished with a 39-point win, and we were holding on strong to the number 1 spot, but Robert Armstrong wasn't the Heisman favorite despite leading the country in passing yards, so against our in-state rivals, Cal, I was going to have to let him sling it again, and on the first play of the game, he took the top off of the Golden Bears defense by hitting Sean Johnson in stride. In the past, we'd been known to really struggle against Cal, so I was really hoping we could avoid a close one today, but Robert Armstrong had other ideas, as his turnover would lead to them tying it up. By the time we were approaching halftime, we ended up being down by 7, but Dustin Noel made a game-changing interception, or so I thought. Armstrong turned it right back over, and when he came over, I refrained from losing it because I knew I'd regret it and we still needed to turn it around. Going into the half down 10 wasn't the end of the world, especially because we started the third quarter by forcing a stop, but we were really missing running back Greg Ridgway, and I almost benched Robert Armstrong after this one. He made the read many seconds too late, and if he wouldn't have busted his back to chase down the corner and knock him out of bounds, he would have been sitting next to me on the bench for a very long time. Luckily, my defense did its job, sacking the Golden Bears out of field goal range, and this was going to be our last chance to try and fight our way back into this one. My offense hadn't scored since the very first play of the game, and that's concerning to think about for a potential playoff team. Fortunately, with about 4 minutes left, Sean Johnson caught his second touchdown of the night, and now it was time to get just one more stop. Obviously, I was furious at Caleb Thomas for dropping this, but I couldn't be angry for long since we stopped Cal anyways, and we were going to get our chance to stay undefeated on the year. I should have known better than to let Robert Armstrong run around and throw whatever he wanted. That could have very well ended the game for us, and we were just lucky that Cal didn't burn even more clock on third down. We did not deserve to still be in this one, but here we were fighting to stay undefeated, and somehow Dan Cox was able to burn the corner deep here, so we had our chance to win it, and Joseph Miles came up clutch. I couldn't believe we were able to escape with a win, as we didn't deserve it at all. But we got it, and the next week, we traveled to Wisconsin. They've been one of the best teams in the Big Ten West for years, and they've always managed to give us a good game, so I was not looking forward to coaching today, even though I had a good game plan for the opening drive. Defensively, we were actually on fire so far, but after watching what Robert Armstrong did last week, I didn't want to get complacent, and this is why. Wisconsin scored off of a fake field goal to end the half, and all of a sudden we were down by 3 points to the Badgers. You all know that's not where the pain ends either. Someone was open for a touchdown, but instead the ball was lost and the Badgers recovered it, so they went down and scored, extending their lead to 10 and putting us in a tough position, which ended up going about how you'd expect it to. I'd like to let it be known that I broke multiple clipboards during today's game, and I was just about to give this one up, but Caleb Thomas convinced me to let him return a kick, and he got us some momentum. All of a sudden, Robert Armstrong wanted to turn into prime Patrick Mahomes with wacky throws like this, and the biggest surprise of the drive was Tom Reed actually dropping a touchdown. It wouldn't matter since Sean Johnson immediately made up for it, and to end the third quarter, we got it to within just one possession. Unfortunately for us though, Wisconsin went 5 wide on 4th down and destroyed my defensive coverage, but this team had heart, and even though the circumstances weren't great, they continued to fight to stay in it with explosive plays like this one, and it was still close. We even got the 2-point conversion, so all we needed was a defensive stop, but that didn't go exactly as planned. Luckily for us, we still had 3 timeouts, but we had to make a tackle, and eventually we finally brought him down, and of course, instead of running on 1st down, Wisconsin faked us out with a pass, so again, it wasn't looking good for us, but I knew that it wasn't completely over yet. And I'm just gonna let this play speak for itself. Wisconsin should have easily ended the game here, but they didn't, and instead, we got right back in it like we needed to, and we even got at the 3rd down where we had to get a stop, but we couldn't quite do it in the end, so our comeback hopes fell just short. 4 of the top 5 teams in the country were in our division. Like, what on earth is this? I didn't get how that was possible, but I knew if we won out, we would definitely sneak into the college football playoffs. And now that we had lost the pressure of remaining undefeated, it was cool to see my guys play with freedom, making huge catches, and giving the Minnesota defense all sorts of problems. Once we got up by 14 points, we had a lead to protect, but senior Dustin Noel kept getting burnt by Torian James, so we gave up a wide open touchdown to the Gophers on the very next play. I was very glad that we responded right back, but after a massive kick return, Minnesota quarterback Brandon Higgins made sure they stayed in it, so we went into the half only up 7, and after some bad defense, I couldn't believe it, but we were in a tie game. It was like we played down to whoever our opponent was. I knew that my team was better than this, and I just wanted to take care of business, but wide receiver Torian James just kept keeping the Gophers in it no matter which corner I decided to put on him. He got them in the position to score here, and after taking a look at the clock, I knew what we needed to do. We just had to run the entire thing out, and like I expected, Robert Armstrong and Joseph Miles were too much to handle, so we got another 1-possession win, but we had to play at number 1 Nebraska next, and I was surprised that we were the favorites. Nebraska had the best offense in the country though, so we had to score a lot, and I wanted to pound the rock today. Robert Armstrong was starting to run the option well, and he pitched this ball perfectly at the last second to Dan Cox for a 37-yard touchdown. On top of that, we got a huge defensive stop on the Cornhuskers' first possession, so we had a real chance to move down the field and get off to an amazing start that would be much needed, but I think my offensive line forgot how to block for a bit. On back-to-back plays, they let Robert Armstrong get railed, so we wouldn't score there. However, Dan Cox was having an incredible performance so far, and he could have had another touchdown here, but he got completely overthrown. Instead, we settled for 3 with Brent Tyson, and I let my defense take care of business, which they kept doing. They're the reason we ended the second quarter up by 17, and we really needed that dominance to continue, because with a win today, we could still have a chance at making the Big Ten championship, but of course, it had to be close. The Cornhuskers tried their hardest to stay in it, and they might have had a chance if third-string running back Kyle Parrish didn't break off this huge play. We were simply the better team today, and I coached us past the number 1 team in the country, which moved us back up to that spot and caused a 4-way tie in the division. The postseason was still 3 games away, and we had a tough end of the season because we still had to take on 2 ranked teams and USC. Illinois also got off to a 14-3 start, so it was crucial that we we finished the first half with a solid possession. Robert Armstrong only had 3 completions and 28 passing yards going into this drive, but he and Dan Cox continued to show off their special connection, and then Jimmy Babcock secured the end zone grab, making it a lot closer than it should have been. We even opened up the third quarter in the best way possible, with cornerback Jimmy Fine finally showing off the speed that he had, but it was immediately called back for clipping, so we had to work it down the field and score the hard way, with Robert Armstrong finding Dan Cox on the broken play. Everything went our way in the third quarter, with Illinois struggling, and there was finally a Tom Reed sighting with 4 minutes left in the game as he found the gap in the defense, but Illinois wouldn't go away as they got it within 3 here, so we had to make sure that we ran out the clock, and on third down, Robert Armstrong sealed it, getting us our 9th win. And on the other side of the country, Nebraska helped us out by taking down Wisconsin in the snow, which meant if we beat number 2 Iowa, we would make the Big Ten championship, and we got off to the exact start that we needed for that. Joseph Miles also began with a massive run as he took this one for 38 yards before getting tracked down, and Tom Reed was making himself very difficult to bring down as he showed off how elusive he could be. We scored on our first offensive possession, and after Iowa found the end zone, we got in again. Then we held the Hawkeyes to just 3 and finished the first half with a massive touchdown as Tom Reed mossed the Iowa cornerback like it was nothing, so I was pumped up about how we were playing. I mean, this one couldn't have gone any better for us as we just continued to outplay the Hawkeyes, and for the first time in a while, we were going to win a game by multiple possessions, which felt amazing. I coached us past number 2 Iowa, and now we were on top of the Big Ten West, along with having a quarterback that's fighting for the Heisman. Our last regular season game of the year was against our biggest rivals, and even though USC was 4-7, they always give us issues, so it doesn't even surprise me that our opening drive resulted in a fumble for 6. They seem to come out pretty prepared for our offense today, and I should have never sent Brent Tyson out to kick this 57-yard field goal. It ended up taking us the entire first quarter to get on the board, but that seemed to be what we needed to get things going for us as Robert Armstrong took this one in. The Trojans did respond back on their next drive with this run, but at this point we were already on a roll offensively. Dan Cox pulled off this ridiculous 49-yard catch over the top of the defense, and he had been getting more looks than anybody else recently. We ended the first half going up by 10 as he caught another one, but USC wouldn't let us pull away. So Robert Armstrong needed to make a good throw here, yet he sailed it a little too high, and that would lead to the Trojans getting to our 10-yard line. On fourth down, I decided we should send a blitz, and it paid off, so all we had to do was drain the rest of the clock to win, but we didn't get the first down, and that gave USC a fighting chance against us. With 27 seconds left, I decided to send another blitz, but this time I forgot to leave a man on the tight end, and my terrible coaching decision could cost us if my team doesn't bail me out in the end. This play could have ended very badly if Robert Armstrong wasn't as confident running the ball as he is, but it put us in the perfect position to feed it to Tom Reed for extra yards, and the freshman Brent Tyson hit his first game winner. We won the victory bell in back-to-back years, and we were ready to get into our third straight Big Ten championship. Michigan was 8-4, so I was hoping this turned into a blowout because we needed to rest some of our players before the playoffs, and somehow Dan Cox came down with this. He was having a remarkable second half of the year as he emerged as the #1 wide receiver, and he was definitely gone after this year to the NFL. After we went down the field on our first drive and scored, the Wolverines did the same thing, and then Robert Armstrong panicked and turned it over just a minute later, so they went up by 7 points. He needed to have a good game today if he wanted to win the Heisman Trophy, but he was missing some throws that he would normally make with ease, so I was glad to see him find Sean Johnson in the end zone with this laser. Michigan would continue to take small leads, but they never lasted for very long. Rick Young must have been invisible to the other team because he was wide open for a 62-yard score, and even though once again the Wolverines went up by 3, we were so quick to respond back as Sean Johnson took it in on a 47-yard play. I wished we could have played a little better defensively, like holding on to interceptions, but I was also happy to hold them to just 3 because after I was aggressive on fourth down and we didn't get it, my team gave up a touchdown while stopping the 2-point conversion, and we just needed to put this one away as it shouldn't be this close. I think Tom Reed dusting the cornerback here for 78 yards like it was nothing proves that case, and we went up here, but Robert Armstrong really should have thrown the 2-point conversion instead because now all Michigan needed was a field goal to win, and I thought their quarterback was going to get a first down here, but he was ruled just short, and you know exactly what we did from there as we burned through the clock and I won my third straight Big Ten championship for UCLA. Robert Armstrong's 47 total touchdowns won him the Heisman, and he had a pretty solid receiving corps surrounding him, so I was hoping they could carry us through the college football playoffs. Our first game was against Wisconsin, and I wasn't thrilled that we were playing the one team that we lost to this season, but Jimmy Fine opened up the semifinal matchup with a 99-yard return, and Wisconsin looked a little bit shook up after that. We even had Greg Ridgway back from injury for the first time in months, and it seemed like everything was finally coming together. The defense was holding really strong against the Badgers, so when Robert Armstrong noticed that Tom Reed dusted his man and he hit him in stride, it was looking like this one could get out of hand very quickly. My team was simply playing better football than Wisconsin today, and after losing to them the first time, I wanted to make sure that it never happened again. Greg Ridgway also seemed to change everything for us as he had over 100 total yards in just the first half alone, and the Badgers were making an effort to come back until this massive hit from senior cornerback Dustin Noel. Junior free safety Robbie Cooley picked it up, and he would have nobody close to catching him as the national championship was getting very close and our defense was going to carry us there. Marcus James couldn't do anything, and I was excited to finally get another chance at the Natty as we officially got our revenge on the Badgers. It looked like Texas was going to beat higher seeded Nebraska, and they did, so the Longhorns were going to be our matchup, and the entire season came down to this. Our defense began the game by getting a third down stop, but just 2 plays later, Robert Armstrong rolled out and gave it right back to them, so we needed to lock up, and believe it or not, Jimmy Fine almost had an interception of his own, but that drop was going to cost us going down by 3. Texas was sending a lot of heat our way through the first quarter, and I think it was messing with Robert Armstrong a lot because he continued to turn the ball over. Sometimes it was hard to believe he was the Heisman winner and a projected first-round pick, but then he'd come out and make plays like this and remind you why he was. That one throw turned around everything for us as a team, and you could see the momentum shift in real time. On 4th and 1, not only did Robert Armstrong secure the first down, but he'd get all the way down to the Longhorn 1-yard line, and Greg Ridgway would take it in. Once again, we forced another 3 and out on Texas, and Robert Armstrong would end the first half by showing off his speed and outrunning everyone chasing him down for 6. I couldn't believe it, but winning the national championship just kept getting closer and closer for us, and Texas didn't seem to show any sense of urgency on offense. So I just let the rushing game take over for the final minutes, and even though we didn't even need it at this point, quarterback Robert Armstrong broke away once again, and we'd go on to win from there. I finally brought home a national championship to UCLA, and next year could be a challenge with everybody leaving for the draft. My contract at UCLA is running out. Despite winning a national championship for them last year, I only have 1 year remaining on my deal, and who knows what the future holds, but first, I have to coach a brand new Bruins team because we lost almost every starter to the NFL draft. With Robert Armstrong, Greg Ridgway, and our best 3 receivers all going in the first round, the offense was full of new faces, and junior quarterback Jamie Sears was getting his first ever career start at the Swamp. If I was going to win a championship with this team before I made my decision on where I'd be next year, he would have to step up, and even though he wore gloves on his throwing hand and was playing a top 10 team, he threw a touchdown on our first drive. I wish our defense was as good as last year's, but obviously it wasn't, and with 2 minutes left in the second quarter, Jamie Sears turned it over in the red zone, so we were lucky to go into the half only down 4. I knew it was going to be hard to coach so many new faces, but nothing was going our way today. Freshman running back Justice Johnson was forced into a big role for this team, and he wasn't ready for it, which wasn't good since the Gators kept scoring on us. I was definitely missing having Robert Armstrong at the helm as we went into the 4th down by 11, but this big third down stop by my defense gave me hope. Florida would have to settle for 3, and we still had a decent chance as Jamie Sears threaded the needle to Jimmy Babcock. On the next play though, somehow this ball ended up in our offensive lineman's hands, and we just continued to lose yardage as the line wasn't able to block for very long. That sack put Jamie Sears out for 3 weeks, and we were going to be stuck with backup quarterback Nicholas Cabral, who was only a freshman. Obviously, we didn't win at the Swamp, and if I wanted to turn the season around before it was too late, we had to beat Rutgers. We did not get off to a good start though. Nicholas Cabral threw an interception on the 3rd play of the game, and somehow the Rutgers cornerback slipped out here and took it all the way to the house for a pick-6 score, and I was fuming. My coaching career was in the hands of a freshman quarterback, and he was scaring me, but he was managing to slowly get in a groove as he found Wendell Johnson for for 28 yards. Justice Johnson took it into the end zone, and all of a sudden, this was a championship contending team. Well, not really, we were still far away from that, but I was starting to feel like I could coach this team into the playoffs this year, and if I could do that, I'd have any job that I wanted. It seemed like Nicholas Cabral actually had a cannon on him, and I wanted to write him off early because he also wore gloves, but he was proving me wrong against Rutgers. Yeah, his playstyle was very risky and full of random moments, but because of that, it also made him hard to predict and stop as Rutgers didn't have an answer. I would have never thought the freshman could be the one that could lead us to a championship, but he got us the win in his debut, and his 4 touchdowns were very impressive. We were already back up to number 6 in the country, and fortunately the next few weeks were easier games because after that, they were rough. The rain could end up giving us problems today, so we might have to run a lot, and Nicholas Cabral was already on top of that. However, backup halfback Brian O'Neill was in for us, and that's because Justice Johnson strained his quadricep in practice. That could make running very difficult, but luckily Jimmy Babcock was able to hold onto the ball no matter the circumstances, and he got wide open to score the opening touchdown on the Hoosiers. They responded back with 2 minutes left in the half, but that gave us plenty of time to go down the field on Indiana and get points of our own. Honestly, 15 seconds would have done the trick since Nicholas Cabral was able to find Kevin Martin for an explosive play that would get us all the way to the 2-yard line, but I wasn't expecting that at all. Sophomore Brett Tyson even ended the second quarter with a 58-yard field goal, so everyone's spirits were super high, but we started the second half in the worst of ways, taking a safety, and within an instant, this game was close again, as Indiana even got the 2-point conversion to tie it up. There was a chance Jamie Sears could be back from injury to play next week, and I didn't know what I was going to do. If Nicholas Cabral could pull out a win here, I would be lost because I mean, how could I not start the guy that had turned around our season when we needed it the most? I don't know what I'll end up doing, but we need a stop, and we are so close to getting it now. On 4th and 2, they went with the run and we locked it up, so we're going back home with a win, and somehow Nebraska lost to Maryland, so that will make the division race very interesting. Jamie Sears is back and healthy now as well, but I just can't get myself to start him today because Nicholas Cabral has just had way too many wild plays. I want to see him at his max potential, and he would have had a great start against the Gophers, but junior Michael Brewer made a very costly mistake, and then the worst possible thing happened here as Nicholas Cabral couldn't get up. He was carted off of the field, and now Jamie Sears would come in and play for us. We scored almost immediately, but so did the Gophers in response, and then Brian O'Neill had his big moment. I don't know why the backups have come in and looked so good this season, but he went for 50 yards before getting stopped, and that would lead to a Jimmy Babcock touchdown. Minnesota was 0-2, but they were giving us the game of their lives as they continued to get themselves in scoring range. So we went into the half down by 13, where we found out that Nicholas was only out with a concussion. That really lifted team spirits as we scored to start the third quarter, but with less than 4 minutes left, we found ourselves down by 15, and the comeback was on. We didn't get the 2-point conversion, but for some reason, Minnesota went for it on 4th down instead of kicking, so we weren't quite out of it yet. Wendell Johnson created some separation as he took this reception 31 yards, and Justin Galloway would hold on to the next pass despite being decapitated. Time was not on our side, so luckily Jamie Sears got out of bounds on the scramble, but he couldn't get the ball out a few plays later, and then, panicking, he hurried it up instead of letting the field goal unit come out, resulting in our comeback hopes falling short. We were now 2-2 this season, and I was honestly starting to panic. UCLA still hadn't offered me a new contract, and maybe I shouldn't have declined their initial offer this offseason because who knows what jobs will be open if this year continues to go bad. The playoffs seem like a pipe dream at this point, but they really aren't. Nicholas Cabral is back from injury this week against Northwestern, and if we somehow win out, I think we can sneak in. I mean, Wisconsin made it at 9-3 last year, so I'm not losing hope yet, especially because Jimmy Babcock was starting to really break out. He kept getting wide open, and he would catch the ball with 4 guys all over him. He ended the first half bringing in his second score of the day, and on the other side of the ball, we were playing really well as Northwestern had yet to get a touchdown on us. Midway through the third quarter, Nicholas Cabral threw up a bomb to Jimmy Babcock, who came down with it and fought for plenty of extra yards in the process, but Wendell Johnson ruined it as the ref caught him committing offensive PI. So instead, we would get absolutely nothing out of the this drive, but luckily it wouldn't even matter with how our defense was playing. They were making quarterback Joey Parks hate his life, and he was completely rattled as he wasn't able to make any reads in the red zone against us. Well, I take that back. He did throw a pretty nice laser on the following play, but on the 2-point conversion, he froze up and he would instantly regret it. From there, we were able to run out the rest of the clock, and we got a much needed win because we could still come out on top of the Big Ten West. Cal has given me issues all throughout my career at UCLA, and I was expecting today to be no different than the rest, so it's a good thing my defense decided to come alive once again. However, the issue was my offense. Nicholas Cabral was really struggling to deal with the Golden Bears' pressure, so I was thrilled to see him evade the pocket and throw a dot to Jimmy Babcock. We were fortunately still in the game, and actually, with time winding down in the third quarter, we were looking to take our first lead of the day. Jimmy Babcock got wide open for the easy snag, and we were now in a much better position to win this rivalry game. It took a while, but we were finally scoring some points, and being up by 7 now, all we needed was one more defensive stop. On 4th and 4, Cal went with the halfback screen, and their running back was so close to getting the first down, but it turns out we held him just short, and that was huge for us, as Brian O'Neill was put in a position to help us drain the clock and seal the win. On 3rd down, he got wide open and laid out to make the most important catch of the day, and he was fighting his hardest to keep the starting spot with Justice Johnson returning soon. The team was starting to figure things out, and we were already back into the top 10, where Louisville, who we play at the end of the year, was sitting at 7-0. This could be the game that changes everything for us. Wisconsin is undefeated and the best team in the country, but even though they're really good, this gives us a chance to make a statement, because if we can beat them, we can beat anybody in the nation. From the start, Nicholas Cabral and Jimmy Babcock were hooking up for massive gains like usual, and we were able to get onto the board first. Defensively, we kept getting 3rd down stops as well, so I felt like if we could ramp up the scoring a bit, we had a decent chance. Wisconsin ended up going up by 3 here, and all of a sudden, they had really stepped up their level of play. After an atrocious read by Nicholas Cabral, things were not looking good for us, and we were just lucky to hold Wisconsin to a field goal again. It gave us a chance to score before the end of the half, and fortunately, the best connection on the team was linking up for large plays. They put running back Justice Johnson in an amazing position where he could just run it in for his first touchdown since being injured, and we went into the half with a lead. By the end of the 3rd quarter, we had maintained it pretty well, as Wisconsin was still down by 3 and they were a little bit shook. Despite their best efforts today, we were playing like the better team, and the explosive plays were destroying them. Jimmy Babcock was left wide open in the end zone, giving us a 10-point lead, and now, with time winding down, we were sitting in a great position to pull off the upset, but they got a touchdown here, so we still needed to recover the onside kick and run out the rest of the clock, which was looking very likely after Brian O'Neill broke off this 28-yard run. On an important 3rd down, Jimmy Babcock fell just short of the end zone, but Brian O'Neill would clutch up and finish the job as we took down the #1 team, and we continued to move up in the polls, which was great news. We have to play at number 5 Iowa, and since Justice Johnson is out with another injury, Brian O'Neill is the starter. He's done a good job when he's been in, and the threat of him running sucked the Iowa safeties down, which led to a wide open Kevin Martin over the top of the defense, who would shed a tackle and take it in. Again, the explosiveness of my offense has always been the best part about it, and this group of guys was figuring it out as we went up by 14. I wish we could have played this well from the beginning of the season, because we could have been undefeated, and I truly believe that. Nicholas Cabral might only be a freshman, but his ability to extend plays and find the open receiver is incredible, and midway through the 2nd quarter, he found Wendell Johnson in the back of the end zone, extending our lead to 18. I was starting to feel bad for all of the poor little kids that had to watch this blowout from the hospital, as we had completely turned our season around, and now the college football playoffs were looking likely. My name was starting to make headlines for college and NFL head coaching positions, and I would have to make a decision at the end of the season, but for now though, I just had to focus on getting this team through the year, and Nicholas Cabral was making that so much easier with this massive win at Iowa. We were now on top of the Big Ten West, and we could secure our position by beating number 4 Illinois, but I knew that that would be quite the challenge. Luckily, Brian O'Neill turned a 4th and 2 into a touchdown scoring play, and it seemed like my defense was playing really well. Despite being in double coverage, I let Nicholas Cabral throw it up to Jimmy Babcock, and like expected, He came down with it as he was playing like the best wide receiver in the country. I just couldn't get over how effortlessly he made lengthy plays look. He always found the open space in the defense, and he even caught his third touchdown of the day before halftime. On the other side of the ball, we just continued to force turnovers, and my defense ended up getting Illinois' starting quarterback benched for the game. In back-to-back weeks, we had blown out a top 5 opponent, and I was so proud of this team. Nebraska was having a down year, but we can never take them lightly. They were at the bottom of the conference, yet on their opening drive, they went all the way down the field on us and scored with this 14-yard run. To follow that up, they forced a 3-and-out, and their running back, Garrett Fountain, wouldn't go down without a fight. He was almost unstoppable, but my offense responded with back-to-back touchdowns, so we were alright. However, Garrett Fountain decided that he was going to score again as he broke tackle after tackle, and he was single-handedly beating my Bruins so far. On top of this, I couldn't believe it, but to end the first half, Nebraska launched up a prayer, and somehow Brody Wood came down with it. So we were now trailing by 14, and I knew this game wouldn't be easy for us, but I didn't think we were ever going to be down by this much at home. We went into the fourth quarter down by 11, and the comeback had to start soon, but unfortunately, we were stopped short on 3rd down, so settling for 3 was the best option. I had to trust my defense, and thank goodness that I did, because they got us the ball back when we needed it the most, and now we had a chance to tie it up. With about 2 minutes left, Nicholas Cabral took a very costly sack, and it gave us no choice but to take the field goal, so now we needed a stop. I was willing to commit everybody to holding Garrett Fountain, and that forced Nebraska to pass on 3rd down, where we got a sack, and all of a sudden we were very close to completing the comeback on the Cornhuskers. Being the wild card that he is, Nicholas Cabral gave every person in the stadium, including me, a heart attack on this play, but it worked, and now we just needed a few yards where tight end Luke Blankenship would make the catch, helping us escape with the last-second win over Nebraska. It seemed like we were almost a lock into the top 4 now, and I was going to coach against Louisville soon, but first, we had our biggest rivalry game. I wanted to leave the Rose Bowl with the victory bell today, and since USC's kicker shanked the 54-yarder wide right, that gave us the opportunity to be the first team on the board, which was looking very likely after Wendell Johnson took a simple pass almost 50 yards inside the Trojan 10-yard line. Brian O'Neill finished the job, and less than a minute later, we forced the USC quarterback into a terrible read. However, on the next play, Nicholas Cabral thought he had an open receiver, but instead, he gave it right back. And then, after another Trojan turnover, we got the ball back, and Wendell Johnson made a toe-touch snag for 6. Believe it or not, we forced another interception here, and almost immediately, Wendell Johnson was left wide open for his 3rd touchdown of the day. Everything that could have gone our way had so far, which was very fortunate as the Trojans really never stood a chance against us. We ended up winning by 14, and now it was time for the moment you all have all been waiting for. Louisville was coming off of a loss to NC State, and the loser of this game would most likely be completely eliminated from the college football playoffs. That meant it was very important we got the win today, and we started off by forcing a turnover. Additionally, Brian O'Neill, who had completely stolen the starting running back job, took it 28 yards before getting dragged down. Tight end Luke Blankenship also began to get more involved with this touchdown grab, and we ended up taking a 21-point lead early. We were playing our best football at the right time, and we need to have a moment of appreciation for everybody on defense because they've had an amazing year. Louisville didn't even get on the board until the 3rd quarter, but maybe it wasn't too late for a comeback. With the Cardinals head coach being my old defensive coordinator, he knew exactly what we were running here, and his guys read it perfectly, taking it back for 6. I was pretty upset about that play for quite a while because it gave Louisville hope, but luckily our lead was too large for us to blow as I coached us past my old school and we got the win in the snow. The Big Ten championship had been ours for years now, but this was the most important one yet because if Michigan beat us, they'd take our spot in the playoffs, and I really need to stop calling this play. It caused us to fall behind early, so I was thrilled when I called the perfect pass that resulted in our first touchdown. Offensively, we were just really struggling to get it going, and defensively, they weren't holding it down like they normally did, as Johnny Rodgers went for 44 yards here, but something must have lit a fire in them because they had 3 consecutive plays in a row where they forced a loss of yardage. That made it so the Wolverines had to settle for 3, but unfortunately, the wild side of Nicholas Cabral didn't pay off off for us when he turned it right back over. His mistake led to Steve Birch bulldozing his way into the end zone, so we went into the half trailing by 13, and that meant our opening drive of the third quarter had to be perfect, which it looked like it was so far, as Luke Blankenship caught the much needed touchdown. Despite Michigan's quarterback being able to make almost every throw in the book, we got the stop, and now my offense was actually threatening to take the lead, which we ended up doing right here. We had completely flipped the switch in the second half, and even though Brian O'Neill tried his hardest to give the game away, we remained in control, and he redeemed himself just a play later as he took the pitch for a large gain. It actually hurt us that this run wasn't marked short, because now Michigan had a chance, so I decided we were going to give their quarterback no time. Blitzing was a very aggressive move, but it seemed like it was paying off until somehow the Wolverines got a wide open receiver and he would take it all the way to the house, making it all come down to this, the 2-point conversion where the quarterback was able to take it in. Now, we were forced to go down the field and get in kicking range, but with these two studs, it shouldn't be an issue for us. Jimmy Babcock continued to make plays while being in single coverage, and honestly, it didn't matter how many guys they put on him because he kept coming down with it. Instead of giving himself up and letting us kick the game-winning field goal though, Brian O'Neill took it into the end zone again, so that gave Michigan another chance, and they were trying to make the most out of it. They got into Hail Mary range, and it all came down to this, where somebody almost caught it, but they didn't, and we won another Big Ten championship, which was enough to get us into the college football playoffs. Nicholas Cabral had had a great freshman year, and sophomore Brian O'Neill had really stepped up. It's fair to say there was really only one dominant target, and I'm ready to get into our semifinal matchup against Louisiana Tech. Somehow, they went the entire season without losing a single game, but we were looking to change that today, as I knew there was nobody on their defense that could guard Jimmy Babcock one-on-one. Their offense seemed to move down the field pretty easily though, so it's a good thing we kept holding them to 3. In fact, it was a great thing because it set up a kickoff return opportunity for freshman running back Jimmy Williams, and he would make the most out of it as he took it all the way to the house to put us up by 8. Then on the next possession, we finally stopped the Bulldogs, and from there we would continue to extend our lead. Even though we wouldn't end up recovering the fumble on this play, I was really proud of how my defense was performing, and as long as they kept holding them to field goals, we'd be good. Jimmy Williams had another chance to pull off a kick return for a touchdown here, but right before he broke free, he got caught, so instead we were going to have to get down the field the hard way, but that didn't seem to be a problem for Nicholas Cabral. He threw back-to-back lasers to Jimmy Babcock, who walked it into the end zone, and this one was extremely close to getting out of hand fast because Louisiana Tech's coach wasn't very aggressive. You absolutely cannot expect to win a game where you kick 6 field goals, and honestly, the Bulldogs quarterback just looked lost out there when it mattered the most. I had somehow gotten this team to the national championship game, and it looked like it was going to be against Penn State until their quarterback threw this costly interception with a minute left. I would have never seen this coming, but after the South Alabama quarterback pulled away for a huge run, it looked like the Jaguars would make the Natty. All they needed was one more first down, and this sealed it, so the national championship was set. After starting the year 2-2, I didn't think we could make it here, but we had somehow done it, and cornerback Andrew Stone got us off to the best possible start as he got his first ever pick 6. Honestly, the story of our season had to be that our defense practically carried us, and I was lucky to have such a great group of guys. Nicholas Cabral broke off a sack here and found a wide open Justin Galloway for a 61-yard touchdown, and on the other side of the ball, we continued to lock up South Alabama. This national championship was starting to feel like it was a little lopsided, but it was still nothing in comparison to the Georgia versus TCU one. Quarterback OJ Sparks just couldn't get anything sparked on offense, and after we went up by 27, I was ready to start planning who I would be coaching for the following season. I was getting both NFL and college offers, so I had a load of options, but I just wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go yet. Jamie Sears finally made another appearance for us at the end of the game, and I walked away with my second straight national championship. My coaching future was up in the air though, and I have offers from college and NFL teams, but first, how did I get here? 14 years ago, I started my coaching career as an offensive coordinator at New Mexico, and after 2 successful seasons there, Nick Saban brought me to Alabama, which led to me getting my first head coaching job at Louisville. After being there for 6 seasons, I finally brought the Ville a national championship, and that led to UCLA throwing a bag at me. For $80 million over 5 years, I became their head coach, and we are coming off back-to-back national championships. However, I'm ready for a change of scenery, and the 3 teams I've narrowed it down to are Kentucky, the Steelers, and the Packers. With the Lions coming off of a Super Bowl win, I feel like Green Bay will be a tough challenge, but they offered me $18 million a year, so I couldn't say no. After taking a look at the team though, it was clear we needed to make some moves, so after I coach in my first NFL game ever, I'll be working on a huge trade. And by the way, I need to have a great season here in Green Bay because I said we're making the playoffs. We ended up starting off down 13, but by the 4th quarter, we had a chance to tie it up, and this should have been held on to. However, instead of scoring, we would fail to even get 3 out of the drive, and after watching miserable quarterback play for 4 quarters, I was ready to change things up, so I traded for Trevor Lawrence, and even though he was 38 years old, he was still playing at a very high level. To open up the 2nd quarter, he found Larry Leak in the back of the Texans' end zone, and he was consistently threading the needle to find his new favorite target. With about 3 minutes left, we were trailing Houston by 3, but we had a chance to go down the field and win it, so Trevor Lawrence continued to deliver the ball right where he needed to, and I was really enjoying coaching him as he ran my plays to perfection. With 1 second left, he threw the game-winning touchdown, and our path to the playoffs began now, so I had to add more talent to the line. I was hoping we could go out and beat the Panthers, and even though the year was 2038, they still weren't very good at football. T-Law appreciated that as he would find Zaire White for back-to-back touchdowns, and to end the first half, Larry Leak fought his hardest to make it into the end zone. With Trevor Lawrence and a new right guard, my offense was humming all day at Lambeau Field, and he threw for 435 yards, so I let the media know we were going to keep passing. We had to play at Minnesota next, and this was a huge game for us if we wanted to win the NFC North this season. In all honesty, this was one of Trevor's worst showings as he threw 2 interceptions in the first half, and he clearly just wasn't in the right headspace today. He threw another one midway through the 3rd quarter, and unfortunately, the Vikings cornerback would take it all the way back to the house for 6, and you can only imagine that I was not happy at all with him. I also learned that I needed to get a new kicker since ours couldn't hit from 56, so I immediately signed Ryan Bowles, and I saw we were still tied for 1st in the division, so I'm confident we can still win the NFC North. I'm not gonna lie though, the Dolphins are giving us a very tough game today, and all I knew to do as a coach was just call plays where Trevor Lawrence could continue to sling it. Fortunately, my defense came up clutch for us as they forced a fumble before Miami was able to score, and Brian Craig would end our following drive with 6. From there, we were able to hang on to our lead against the Dolphins, so we were now 3-2, and as T-Law and Larry Leak continued to hook up, everyone saw their special connection. In all honesty, our game against the Saints was pretty boring for most of it, but with 3 minutes left, they were trying to come back, and all of a sudden, we went from dominating all day to being in trouble. It would all come down to if the defense could lock up one more time and get a stop, which fortunately, with this pass sailing out of bounds, they were able to do. I'd gotten the Packers into the top 5 of the NFL, and the fans were loving me so far. I was starting to feel like I could coach this team to the Super Bowl in my first year in the NFL, but maybe not, because we just can't seem to beat the Vikings. We were trailing by 2 possessions until this laser from T-Law, and I swore that our corner got both of his feet down on this goal line interception, so I threw the challenge flag, and it wasn't successful, but at least we held them to just 3. It gave us a chance to stay in the game and potentially pull off the comeback, especially since Trevor Lawrence thread the needle to Bradley Alley with 3.5 minutes remaining. After that, we forced Minnesota to a 3-and-out, and once I saw tight end Sherrod Thompson pull off this ridiculous one-handed grab, I knew we would win. Ryan Bowles put us up with this field goal, and on the other side of the ball, our defense secured the comeback win. At this point, we had really turned around our season, so I was hoping I could continue to coach us to wins, and on this play, I was about to lose it on Trevor Lawrence for throwing it, but Larry Leak somehow came down with it, and even though we lost to them the first time this year, we took down the Bears. It wasn't even close, and all of my receivers were determined to keep putting up crazy numbers. Defensively, I thought my guys were honestly crushing it, and we were, until today against the Bills. However, every good team has their off games throughout the year, so I don't think this result is the end of the world because we're still leading the NFC North. Coming up now though, I have to coach in a very important matchup which is against the reigning Super Bowl champions, and currently Trevor Lawrence has the 7th best odds to win the MVP race, so since my defense isn't doing a good job of stopping Detroit today, he'll need a breakout performance, which would help his MVP chances if he played well. Unfortunately, Unfortunately though, by the end of the third quarter, my guys were trailing the Lions by 17 points, so the comeback needed to start now or else we would lose. We came so close to getting a stop on defense, but ultimately Madden scripting took over, so now we were on a losing streak, and if I wanted to make the Super Bowl, I'd have to turn it around. We had to start winning again to get locked into the playoffs, and I was hoping the Jets were still a below average team in this franchise. 38-year-old Trevor Lawrence still ran like he was 20, but we were losing going into the fourth quarter, so it's a good thing we got to finally see him whip out his cannon in front of everybody. It was huge as he dropped a 65-yard bomb on the money, and that seemed like it would be the difference maker, but on a third down that would have sealed the game, T-Law failed to lead his receiver, so now it was all in the hands of my defense, and it looked like the Jets were gonna find a way to get in field goal range, but what happened was even worse than that as they scored a touchdown with 10 seconds remaining and we lost another game. All of a sudden, it seemed like making the playoffs was potentially on the line, and it didn't help that our starting halfback was out. It was going to be hard to bounce back at this point, but if we were going to, we would need to close out this game, and after linebacker Greg Pippen railed the Falcons defender, my team would take it back to the house, giving us a 2-possession lead, which would end up resulting in a win. We were back and currently on pace to make the playoffs, but I wanted to make sure my team finished our last 5 regular season games with wins, so I brought out some new plays that nobody had ever seen and I had never called before. That allowed us to leave Tampa Bay on top of the Bucks, and I was always a pretty aggressive head coach, but against the Los Angeles Rams, I took it up to another level as I called a play every single time we got stuck in a 4th down situation. Due to that, we were able to stay in the game when we might have otherwise not been able to, and we were even in a pretty good position with just 2.5 minutes remaining. All we had to do was finish running out the clock on the Rams, and with one last aggressive 4th down play call, my team sealed the game, which kept us tied for first in the NFC North. If we could beat the Lions today, we would most likely win the division, but nothing was going our way, like this not being ruled a catch by Sherrod Thompson. However, I challenged it anyway, and the refs actually overturned it, so that completely changed the game for us as we would end the first half going up by 4 points. With 2 minutes remaining, we had maintained that same lead, and I decided to call a blitz to try and pick up a stop. It couldn't have gone more perfectly for us, and my aggression as a coach continued to be the key to our success. The following week in Philadelphia though, we got a wake-up call as we got off to an atrocious start, falling behind by 28 points, and like you'd expect, there was no recovering from that, so we just had to make sure it didn't happen again. Our last regular season game was against the Patriots, and we got on the board first, which was important since it seemed like it would be a high-scoring game. I was correct about that as we combined for 56 points, but luckily we ended up having more in the end, and I was just ready to coach in my first playoff game ever. Trevor Lawrence finished with some insane numbers, and it wouldn't have been possible without this receiving core. I also guaranteed the fans a win, so I was thrilled that my defense forced an interception just a few minutes into the game because it led to Trevor Lawrence getting us into the end zone and on the board first. He was dissecting the Panthers defense as he found Larry Leak for 6 on the next drive, but unfortunately by the end of the first half it was a tie game, so I had to give a motivational halftime speech, and wide receiver Zaire White clearly took it to heart. He started the third quarter with a 61-yard touchdown, and I wish it would have inspired my defense to perform better, but it did not. We were heading into the fourth trailing the Panthers by 4 points, and that's when we got the lucky break that we needed. The Carolina quarterback had some miscommunication with his receiver. Cornerback Courtney Palmer was in the right position, and the rest is history as he outran everybody to take it back for 6. However, it inspired my other players that weren't as good to play a little more aggressively, and almost instantly we would pay for that as we fell back down 4. From there, I was hoping that we could finish the game by going down the field and scoring with no time remaining, but I got worried that we were moving a little bit too fast because just like it was in college, my offense was still very explosive. With a minute left, Trevor Lawrence and Zaire White hooked up again, and then 38-year-old T-Law took off and made sure that nobody was stopping him from making it into the end zone. The Panthers still had 27 seconds and 3 timeouts though, and it was clearly far from over. They would send it to overtime here, but we got the ball first, and for some reason, I thought it would be an easy win from there, but all of a sudden, we were stuck on 4th down, and even though Trevor Lawrence got drilled almost immediately, he escaped, and I thought he was going to save us, but he just couldn't make the throw. My first year coaching in the NFL ended up finishing with a wildcard loss at home where we should have won, and I was devastated. Going into my 16th season coaching, I knew that this would be it for me, and I wanted to end on a Super Bowl win. 39-year-old T-Law was coming off of an MVP year, and I made a ton of moves as I brought in running back Greg Ridgway, who I coached at UCLA, and cornerback Dustin Noel, who also played for me in college. This led to the offense being stacked and the defense being even better, so I was a little surprised we were in such a close game with the Seahawks, especially because they kept toasting my defense no matter what formation or play I called. Even with his old legs, Trevor Lawrence could still take off though, so that made him hard to stop as he kept my team in it with 2 minutes remaining. He was having an incredible game as this throw would send it to overtime, but after losing the coin toss, I had to trust my defense, and thankfully they pulled off a big stop, so from there my offense would slowly maneuver their way down the field, which would set up the game-winning field goal in the season opener. Clearly, winning a Super Bowl with this team was going to be harder than I anticipated, especially because against the Washington Commanders, we started off down by 21. I mean, it took us an entire half to get 3 points, but I must have given an incredible halftime speech because things were much different throughout the second. My team fought all the way back just to make it a one-possession game, and it would all come down to if we could hold the Commanders short. Here on 3rd and inches, I was hoping we could, but we didn't, so we picked up our first loss, and I immediately made a trade to improve the defense even more. If I couldn't get this roster to the Super Bowl, I just have to accept that I'm not a good coach. Well, at least at the NFL level, because we all know what I've achieved coaching in college. Luckily, the Packers own the Bears like usual, and I was hoping we were about to get into a rhythm, but the Cardinals were making that difficult. With about 2 minutes left, we were trailing by 3, and Greg Ridgway's awareness was clearly through the roof as he made that catch and tied it up for us, sending the game into overtime. In this one, we won the toss, and since I obviously told my team to elect to receive, all it should have taken was one drive to win it, but after a few terrible drops, kicker Sidney Manning had to go out and put us up by 3, which was great and all, but it also gave Arizona a chance they shouldn't have had, and obviously they tied it. It was blocked. I couldn't believe it, but my special teams unit made the play of the season, and that kept us on top of the NFC North. Once again, we had to play the Bears, and it was a cakewalk. The score makes it look a lot closer than it was, but this play sums up the game pretty well, and we swept Chicago. At this point in the year, tight end Sherrod Thompson had been T-Law's favorite target, and it's understandable why, because he comes down with everything. It made scoring easy, and Kansas City tried their best to keep up with my offense, but today, Trevor Lawrence was just making Chiefs fans miss Patrick Mahomes, and the craziest part was he was gunning for his records. This was our first blowout win of the year, and I was hoping it was the first of many this season because they made my job so much easier. With this throw, Trevor Lawrence was now just 4 touchdowns shy of being the all-time NFL leader in career touchdown passes, and he was tearing apart the Vikings defense as he gunned for the record. It wasn't going to happen today, but he was going to get close to it, and obviously, with him playing this well, it was an easy win. T-Law was now tied with Mahomes at 686, and ticket prices were through the roof. It's time to watch Trevor Lawrence make history, and the all-time record-setting throw would come on a pass to wide receiver Jawan Weber. However, there was nothing mentioned by EA about this, so I'm hoping the game will honor Trevor in some way afterwards, because even in NCAA Football 14, it shows whenever you break any type of record. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence wasn't losing on his big day, and my team was now 7-1. The only thing I could find about the record was a singular tweet, and I thought breaking the career all-time passing touchdowns record was a big deal, but I guess Madden didn't. Anyways, after a slow start, Trevor Lawrence finally got in a rhythm against the 49ers with this massive throw, and my team went from being down 13 to going up 17. I was loving how well we were playing, and as of now, we were the best team in the NFL. I thought a fake field goal was a great way to start our game against the Lions, but but they responded back from it really fast, so we just had to do the same with this touchdown. You wouldn't expect T-Law to be such a runner at 39 years old, but he could pull it off still, and at this point, I felt like the playoffs were going to be a lock for us. The Lions couldn't defend their home field, and Greg Ridgway got a breakout challenge, so he needed to have a huge game against Minnesota, which wasn't looking likely nearing the half. He only had a singular touchdown run, but he needed to keep scoring, and with a couple of minutes left, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. On the bright side though, we were going to win another divisional matchup in the NFC North, and Greg Ridgway even got a late touchdown to rub the salt in the wound. Sooner than later, we could lock up the 1 seed, but we would have to beat the Rams, the reigning Super Bowl champions, and this certainly wasn't Trevor Lawrence's best game as he had some questionable turnovers. However, we still had a 7-point lead approaching halftime, and then he pulled off a remarkable 50-yard throw to Zaire White, which unfortunately didn't result in points due to this sack, and it seemed like everything that could possibly go wrong for us did as the Rams forced a fumble to start the third quarter, but I continued to keep us ahead with aggressive play calls like this, and at the end of the day, you couldn't even tell we ever struggled. With 5 games remaining, we clinched a playoff spot, so I'm going to quickly cover how the rest of the regular season went for us. With 2 minutes left, we were losing to Detroit in the snow at Lambeau, but we got a much needed 4th down stop, so Trevor Lawrence had an opportunity to put on a show in front of our home crowd in the final seconds, and he did enough to send it to overtime, but we never saw the ball as the Lions would ruin our 9-game winning streak. I started to get worried my team was falling off right before the postseason, and with 39 seconds left, once again, my team was trailing by 3 to the Chargers. I should have just sent out the special teams unit, but I didn't, and Trevor Lawrence took a game-losing sack, so when we traveled to Las Vegas next week, we had to bounce back, and I could tell that nobody wanted to win more than T-Law today by the way he was playing against the Raiders. For the 3rd week in a row though, we were trailing by 3 and he was gonna have to put together a comeback drive, and fortunately this time I called the right plays and that put us in an amazing position to get the win, but we scored too fast and the Raiders came very close to taking advantage of that. Luckily, my defense forced back-to-back sacks that would seal the winning result for us, and as long as we could hold on to our lead against the Saints, we were about to clinch the 1 seed. Greg Ridgway did more than enough as not only did he get the first down here, but he also got us down to the 1-yard line, and from there, it was over. The top seed in the NFC was ours, so I played a lot of the backups in our Week 18 loss to the Ravens, and I was just ready to jump into the 2039 NFL playoffs where I guaranteed the fans a win. It seemed like T-Law took a step back this season, but Greg Ridgway made up for that, and so did this receiving core that was stacked as there was normally always someone wide open for T-Law to throw it to. The Rams quarterback seemed a little scared as he slid instead of taking an easy first down here, and I made sure my guys didn't come into the game playing with that mentality. Greg Ridgway was fighting for every last yard he could, and in all honesty, he was the only consistent part of my offense so far. Luckily, on the other side of the ball, we forced a huge fumble here that we recovered at midfield, but Trevor Lawrence didn't waste any time giving it right back to the Rams. That moment sure didn't live in his head for long though, as he stunned everybody, including me, when he dropped a 70-yard bomb to end the first half. And we could have increased our lead by even more, but Greg Ridgway couldn't make this catch, so we just went up by 10 instead and continued to do what we needed to do. Even T-Law was hyping up the crowd, and he was certainly not going to be put out in the first round this year. Once again, he made another incredible deep throw, yet the Rams were still in it with 2 minutes remaining, and I'm not gonna lie, everyone was getting a bit nervous until Greg Ridgway somehow popped out of this with nobody near him. He would take it all the way to the house untouched to put us back up by 10, and I won my first NFL playoff game because of that. The NFC Championship was against the Bucks, and Greg Ridgway got us onto the board first. For a split second, I thought I was playing against 61-year-old Tom Brady, but it turns out that it was actually someone else at quarterback. We took a 3-point lead to end the first half, and I thought things were looking good until T-Law threw an interception on this drive. Not only would we lose possession of the ball, but I'd call a costly blitz that didn't get in, and the Buccaneers would use that to their advantage as they went up by 4. Fortunately though, my offense was even more explosive than that. Trevor Lawrence would hit Zaire White in stride, and he outran everybody on the field as well, going for a 78-yard touchdown, and that would completely change the game for us. Even though Tom Brady Jr. would try to keep it close, it wouldn't matter because the Bucs defense would have to stop shortstop running back Greg Ridgway, and just like last week, he wasn't going down without a fight. This first down catch by him would end up sending my team to the Super Bowl, and I was ready to coach in my last game ever. T-Law didn't win MVP this year, but he was playing in the Super Bowl, so I don't think he really cared. Greg Ridgway won me a championship in college, and he was looking to get me a Lombardi as well with runs like this, and the Raiders were a 7 seed that made an upset run to get here, so I was hoping we could pull away early, but that just wasn't the case. I'm just glad that so far my offense hadn't been stopped yet, and Trevor Lawrence along with the rest of the guys continued to prove that they were going to be hard to defend. So to start the fourth quarter, we were up by 11, and defensively I had been aggressive all day, but it was certainly paying off until it didn't. I don't know what happened here, but on fourth down, somehow the Raiders receiver got wide open, and this was game changing. All of a sudden, we were starting to blow it, and on 3rd and 37, yes, 3rd and 37, after forcing multiple stacks and getting a lucky holding call, they got out of it with this wild catch. So I got upset, told my guys to send the house, and it actually paid off as we forced a huge turnover. However, while running out the clock, Greg Ridgway would lose the ball and the Raiders recovered it, so thank goodness the refs watched the replay, saw his knee was down, and made the correct call. It was a game of inches, but we got what we needed, and I finished my 16-year coaching career by winning a Super Bowl with the Green Bay Packers. I brought numerous college trophies to Louisville and UCLA, but this one just felt even better than the rest.